Chapter 33:25. Yu suddenly hugged him and hugged his shoulders. His eyes were red as he said, "Daddy, I'm begging you, okay? Trust me this time and trust your two sons' abilities." Muyaja clenched his fists tightly. He suddenly released them and gently hugged the two little lads. "Wait for me." "Okay." 2:00 in the morning. It was midnight. The night was dark and gloomy. Dark clouds covered the moon and it looked like it was going to rain heavily. The car sent Yu and Xiao Yichen to the harbor early and left quickly. Xiao Yichen held on to Yu's hand tightly and didn't want to let go. The two little lads stood at the harbor. The night wind was very strong and the cold sea breeze made their cheeks hurt. "Yu, do you know? Actually, I'm not stupid at all. Most of the time, I know a lot. It's not like I don't know how to solve those math problems." Yu was stunned and turned to look at him. Memories of their first encounter flashed through his mind. The two of them sat on the Ferris wheel and faced each other. He clumsily counted with his fingers in front of Yu when they were faced with a math problem. Yu mocked him mercilessly. "You're not smart enough, so you're using your height to make up for it." From the first time they met, Xiao Yichen had the impression that he was stupid. "What's 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10? I'll give you 10 seconds to figure it out." Little Yichen immediately began to count them one by one with a serious look on his face. Yu looked at him speechlessly. He thought to himself, did this brother of mine really come from the same womb as me? How can he be so stupid? But what was the truth? Xiao Yichen wasn't stupid. On the contrary, he was very smart and knew how to pretend to be stupid. That was why he had an excuse to pester Yu and kept asking him to teach him math problems. At that time, Yu wasn't close to him and his daddy. It seemed that this was the only way to get close to his arrogant younger brother. However, as the older brother, he always seemed to be looked down upon by his younger brother. Now, he didn't want to be looked down upon. He wanted Yu to know that even though he wasn't as smart as him, he had the ability to protect him and his mommy. "Yu, Daddy, Mommy, and I live together, in the same house, together, what do you think?" He still remembered how he stood in front of him and confessed his feelings. "I like it very much. I like Mommy and I like you. I want to live together as a family. Like this. That's the feeling of home, isn't it? Yu, I definitely won't snatch your mommy from you. On the contrary, you'll still have Daddy's love and my love. Between the three of us, we'll spoil you, okay?" Yu snapped out of his thoughts and smiled, but his eyes were tearing up. He was a clear-minded person. How could he not know that Xiao Yichen was pretending to be stupid? As the older brother, he was deliberately giving in to him. No matter how much he bullied him, Xiao Yichen would just laugh it off. "Look!" Xiao Yichen raised his wrist and waved it in front of Yu. "Do you still remember this necklace?" Under the moonlight, the amethyst necklace on Mu Yichen's wrist shone brightly. "Of course I remember." Yu raised his wrist and put it together with Yu's. The identical amethyst necklace on both wrists was beautiful and in sync. Chapter 33:26. I swear I'll protect you forever. Little Yichen's fingers interlocked with his brother's tightly. The twins had a tacit understanding of each other, so there was no need for words. They could understand each other's hearts. Not far away, the sound of a ship's engine could be heard. However, the cruise ship did not approach the port. Instead, it sent a yacht over. Yu held onto him with one hand and carried the suitcase with the other until the yacht sailed towards them. There were two men on the yacht. When they approached the port, they were shocked to see two identical children standing together. Why were there two children? Wasn't there only one? Moreover, where was the 3 billion in cash that they agreed on? Don't tell him that the money was in the suitcase that the child was carrying. How much money could such a small suitcase contain? The two children looked too similar. In the past, Yu was much shorter than Xiao Yichen. However, in the past year, Yu had grown rapidly and was gradually catching up to Xiao Yichen's height. The two of them were almost the same height, so it was even harder to tell them apart. Why are there two? The man muttered in English. Yu said calmly, isn't it better to have two people as hostages? This isn't a losing deal. The man immediately picked up the radio and made a call. It was obviously to Dietrich. No one knew what he said. After hanging up, he came ashore and snorted coldly. No matter how many people there are, we have to follow the rules. Yu handed the suitcase to him calmly. How much is here? Yu said calmly, $500 million. The man took the suitcase and was about to open it when he realized that there was a combination lock. This combination lock was different from other common combination locks. This combination lock consisted of 5 digits and an iris recognition system. It was difficult to crack a 5-digit combination lock. Moreover, it was set up by Yu. Combination lock. The man ordered in broken Chinese, what's the combination? Who do you think you are? You can't tell me the password until I see your leader in person. Yu wasn't stupid. He knew that if he wasn't prepared to pay that much money, Dietrich wouldn't let him board the cruise ship. Then, he wouldn't be able to see his mother, let alone negotiate with Dietrich. Therefore, he specially prepared $500 million. That phone call just now was the man following Dimitri's instructions on how to deal with it. However, from the looks of it, his guess was right. If he took the briefcase away, there was no need for him and Mui Chen to keep their lives. Yu saw a gun on his waist. That gun must be used to end his life. Dietrich must have told his subordinate to kill him as soon as he got the cash. Therefore, he had specially set up a strict password lock. Of course, he would not hand over the password lock so easily. Otherwise, once he got the money, they would be shot on the spot and their bodies would be thrown into the sea. Yu had made a careful plan beforehand. He even knew Dietrich's trump card. This man was so cunning that he had to be on guard. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought Mui Chen into danger. The man was indeed annoyed. He immediately pulled out his gun and pressed it against Yu's forehead. He said fiercely, "Are you playing with me?" Chapter 33:27. You've misunderstood. How dare I joke around with my life? Be smart and hand over the password. If I tell you the password, I'll be shot between my eyebrows by this gun in your hand and drown in the sea. His words were truly shocking. The man widened his eyes and immediately reacted. He pressed the muzzle of the gun even tighter. Do you believe that I'll kill you right now? The cold pistol was emitting cold air from the pitch black hole. Mui Chen was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was even prepared to grab the gun at any moment. Yu was calm enough. Instead, he smiled and said, "If you kill me, your boss's $3 billion will be gone." Oh, right, I forgot to mention that other than me, no one else can open this password-protected box. Let me board the ship. Yu opened his arms and said calmly, "I have a deal that I want to discuss with your boss." The man looked at him suspiciously. Then, he put the gun away and began to search Yu and Xiao Yichen's bodies. When he was sure that they were not carrying any equipment or weapons, he snorted coldly. "Give me your hands." Mui Chen did not understand what he meant. Yu raised his hands and allowed the man to handcuff his wrists. The latter immediately understood and obediently extended his hands, allowing his wrists to be handcuffed. The two little munchkins boarded the yacht successfully. As soon as Mui Chen and Yu boarded the yacht, they were led to the VIP cabin. The yacht was huge. It was a few hundred meters from the entrance to the VIP cabin where Dietrich was. When a door opened, Mui Chen and Yu walked in. Dietrich was sitting on the leather sofa. When he saw the two little munchkins, he asked in confusion, "Why are there two of you? Why are there two kids?" Yu raised her head and met Dimitri's eyes expressionlessly. "Dimitri, we finally meet. The other one is. You don't need to know who it is." Yu looked up and said to Dietrich, "Now, can you remove the handcuffs on our hands?" Dietrich looked at him warily. Yu tilted her head innocently and said contemptuously, "Don't tell me you're afraid of two weak children." What a joke. Immediately, someone unlocked the handcuffs on Yu and Xiao Chen. Yu naturally sat down opposite him. She smiled and said, "Mr. Dietrich, due to Hurricane Group's negligence, we're deeply sorry for the losses we've caused you. So, we're here to express our gratitude." Yu signaled with her eyes. Xiao Chen immediately understood and walked forward. She placed a suitcase on the table and unlocked it in front of everyone. She slowly pushed the suitcase full of US dollars in front of Dietrich. Dietrich glanced at them indifferently and couldn't help but frown. The US dollars were stacked neatly in the suitcase. 500 million US dollars was not a small sum, but compared to the amount Dietrich had requested, it was nowhere near enough. Moreover, compared to the amount he had lost, it was not even worth mentioning. Chapter 33-28. Dietrich was an ambitious capitalist. He was cunning and greedy by nature. How could he be satisfied with such a small amount? He leaned back leisurely on the sofa, swirling the wine glass in his hand. He glanced expressionlessly at Yu, who was sitting elegantly in front of him, and snorted. "This is your so-called sincerity?" Yu smiled and said calmly, "That's right, Mr. Dietrich. After all, I've caused you quite a bit of loss, so this is a token of my sincerity." "A token of my sincerity? A token of my sincerity?" What did this brat think he was? A philanthropist? Token of my sincerity? Dietrich couldn't help but laugh out loud. He took a sip of red wine and slowly stood up. He walked up to him, leaned forward slightly, and looked down at him. He asked coldly, "A mere 500 million USD. How does it compare to the amount I've lost?" Dietrich's eyes were calm. He smiled and said, "Of course it's insignificant. But Mr. Dietrich, don't you think it's too much to ask me to prepare so much money in 2 hours?" Dietrich narrowed his eyes, revealing a beast-like sharpness. He curled his lips coldly and laughed mockingly. He waved his hand and smashed the wine glass in his hand at Yu's head. Bang! The entire wine cup was smashed to pieces. The scarlet red wine dripped down the tip of his hair. "Is this your so-called sincerity?" he roared in disdain. Yu. Mui Chen turned pale with fright as he pounced over in trepidation. Yu was still sitting calmly on the sofa. He didn't make a sound. His lips were still curled into a gentle smile, but his face was a little haggard. The crimson red wine mixed with viscous blood flowed down from his forehead, soaking half of his jade-like face. A strand of chestnut hair on his forehead was stained with blood and flowed into his eye socket. His entire left eye immediately turned crimson red. With one eye closed and the other half open, he calmly looked at Dietrich without the slightest hint of panic. When Mui Chen saw this, anger rose from his heart. He suddenly stood up and glared at Dietrich. He wanted nothing more than to throw a punch at this face. As he watched this man humiliate Yu, he was naturally furious. Yu narrowed his left eye and raised his hand to stop him. He said calmly, "Brother, don't be impulsive." Xiao Chen was indignant. He gritted his teeth and turned around. "But... Yu, you're bleeding." "Eyes? Are eyes important? Did the glass get into your eyes?" It's okay. Sit down. Mu Yi-chen gritted his teeth and finally stepped back unwillingly. Yu Yu calmly rolled up his sleeves and casually wiped the blood and wine off his face. He smiled at Fei Lian. Beatrice, I'm very sorry about this. I also know that your loss is not something that can be compensated with a mere 500 million. But don't you think that what you did, kidnapping a weak woman to threaten her, is really ungentlemanly? Even though he was in such a sorry state, he still maintained perfect etiquette. The smile on his face was elegant and charming, and there was no trace of disappointment. Even Beatrice couldn't help but be stunned. Chapter 33-29. However, it only lasted for a moment before he regained his composure and a look of disdain appeared on his face. Beatrice turned around and returned to the sofa. He sat down slowly and snorted at him. Manners? Humph, you're just a little thing. Do you know how to behave? Yu Yu smiled and said, I'm still young and inexperienced. Compared to you, I haven't seen much of the world. Naturally, I'm not good enough. If I've offended you in any way, please forgive me and don't hold it against me. We have a long future ahead of us. Don't let such a small matter ruin our friendship. Friendship. This little guy was smart. He knew that he couldn't make enemies with him and wanted to befriend him. Since you said you wanted to make a deal with me, what's the deal about? Yu Yu said, $3 billion and let my mommy go. Ha! Since you said it's a deal, where's the $3 billion? I've already said that it's too much to prepare within 2 hours. That's too much. Beatrice said coldly. Since you said it's a deal, we'll give you the money and you deliver the goods. That's the rule. I don't care what methods you use. If you don't get it, then you're breaking the contract. The man's sinister gaze fell on him as he said this. He couldn't help but feel suspicious. You didn't even prepare the money. Who gave you the courage to come? He was digging his own grave. Even if I didn't prepare anything, I should show my sincerity. Yu Yu smiled. Moreover, my mommy's life is still unknown. I should at least confirm with my own eyes that she's safe and sound. Only then can I fulfill my promise to you. Xiao Yi-chen immediately stood up and said, let us see mommy. Beatrice glanced at Mu Yi-chen and furrowed his brows. Mu Yi-chen was obviously extremely worried. He lost control and said, I want to see my mommy. Let me see her. Beatrice raised his brows and tapped his fingers on the sofa's armrest. He laughed and said, what a filial child. It's rare for someone to be so protective of their mother. He gently waved his hand, and one of his men immediately stepped forward. With a bang, he threw a punch. Xiao Yi-chen was caught off guard and was hit squarely by the punch. His body fell to the ground, and the huge force caused his head to shake. He shook his head, but in the end, he couldn't withstand it and fainted. Since he wants to see his dear mother, let him see her. Yu Yu stood up nervously. What are you doing? The subordinate beside him immediately raised his leg and swept him to the ground. Yu Yu frowned in pain, but did not make a sound. He gritted his teeth and raised his head. Beatrice said coldly, go and lock this little thing up with that woman. Understood. The subordinate walked over and grabbed Xiao Yi-chen's collar with one hand, easily lifting him up and dragging him out. The door closed again, leaving only Yu Yu and Beatrice. Yu Yu looked worriedly in the direction of the door. His face was full of fear, but there was a victorious smile in his eyes. He struggled to get up from the ground and said, give me 5 hours. I'll fulfill my promise. Chapter 33:30. Beatrice narrowed his eyes dangerously. You want to talk terms with me? Yu Yu smirked. I'm in a weaker position now. What right do I have to talk terms with you? You can take this as a request. He struggled to get up and walk to the table. He pushed the suitcase over and said slowly, "The money here is a token of my sincerity. Please give me 5 hours. After 5 hours, I'll prepare 3 billion and present it to you." Beatrice suddenly stood up and grabbed him by the collar. He pulled him in front of him and said darkly, "After 5 hours. Brat, you can't be playing some kind of trick with me, right? How would I dare to play tricks with you?" Yu's collar was grabbed by him and his throat was locked by his collar. He was a little out of breath and his face was slightly red from suffocation. However, he still said calmly, "My mother and brother are in your hands. With these 2 bargaining chips in my hands, how would I dare?" Beatrice stared deeply into his eyes. Suddenly, his lips parted, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. "Ha ha ha. All right." Beatrice let go of his collar. "I'll give you 5 hours. Don't disappoint me. If there's even 1 cent less, don't blame me for throwing the 3 of you into the sea to feed the fish." Yu heard this and finally heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at Beatrice and his back was covered in cold sweat. He smiled and said, "Thank you." There was a huge cellar under the cruise ship. It had always been used as a warehouse. A few crew members dragged Mui Chen by the collar and dragged him to the cellar. They opened the lock. Damn it. It smells like mold. In the cellar, there was a huge iron cage. This kind of iron cage was usually used to transport beasts or rare animals. In Beatrice's case, it was used to smuggle people. Yun Shishir was trapped in the cage. Although the cage had been wiped clean, the smell of blood could still be smelled. Needless to say, this cage had taken someone's life before. However, she did not feel afraid. Or rather, she had a certain conviction in her heart. Heaven helps the worthy. At least, she knew in her heart that she would not die for the time being. Even though she couldn't figure out the intentions of the man who locked her up here, she vaguely realized that he ordered people to dress her up in such beautiful clothes to show off to others. Auction. She had heard the word pop from his lips. Yun Shishir would never have thought that Beatrice was planning to auction her alive. As for this cage, it was because a living person was disobedient and was beaten to death. How could she have known that in this world, there existed such a dark network and such a terrifying auction? Put this brat in a cage. Mui Chen opened his eyes slightly. Along the way, Mui Chen had been silently familiarizing himself with the terrain. Even though his eyes were closed, he was still able to draw a complete map in his mind. Realizing that he was already in the cellar, his right hand slowly touched his waist belt. Previously, before boarding the ship, Beatrice's subordinates had searched his entire body but didn't find any suspicious weapons. That was because his weapons were hidden in an unknown place. Chapter 33-31. He wore a belt on his pants. The belt was just an ordinary belt, but the buckle was not simple. When Yun Shishir saw someone enter with a child in his hand, she had a bad premonition. Until she saw the child in the man's hand, she screamed in shock. Before she could finish her sentence, Xiao Yi Chen opened his eyes slightly and gave her a look. Yun Shishir immediately shut her mouth and clutched the iron bars tightly as her heart trembled with fear. The crew member threw him to the ground and tried to kick him a few times. Seeing that he didn't react, they assumed that he was a child and wouldn't be a threat. Hence, they walked to the other cage and opened the lock. Now was the time. Mui Chen flipped over and landed firmly on the ground. He casually grabbed the buckle, pulled it off, and pressed the mechanism. A sharp blade immediately popped out from the metal buckle. He looked around and saw that there were 6 people in total. When the crew heard the commotion behind them, they turned around abruptly, only to see Mui Chen standing behind them with a sharp dagger in his hand. Their faces turned pale with fright. Damn it, where did this brat get the dagger? Take him down. 2 tall and burly men immediately pounced on him. They originally thought that the child would be scared witless, but they didn't expect Xiao Yichen to charge at them. The two men immediately took out their machetes and slashed at him. Xiao Yichen nimbly dodged their attacks and grabbed the man in front. He gripped the man's wrist tightly with such force that the man cried out in pain. The machete fell to the ground with a clang. "Ah!" Xiao Yichen sneered and jumped up. His hands held the man's waist tightly, and he used the man's strength to twist his legs around the man's neck like a pair of scissors. He twisted his neck fiercely and spun it in a dazzling manner. The man's neck was tightly gripped. Then, he felt a sharp pain as the inertia threw him to the ground. His back slammed heavily against the ground, as if his spine was about to break. Xiao Yichen raised his hand and slit his throat with the sharp dagger. Blood spurted out. From the moment he made his move to the moment he killed his opponent, it took him less than 10 seconds. Fast, accurate, and ruthless, every move made one's scalp tingle. No one would have thought that a little brat would have such powerful skills. Such a small fellow was actually such a ruthless character. "Go!" The man gave another order and fumbled for his gun. One of the men picked up a scimitar from the ground and charged at him. "Be careful." When Yun Shishir saw another man stabbing him with a knife, he was so scared that he almost suffocated. Xiao Yichen curled his lips and didn't turn around. Based on the sound of footsteps behind him, he turned around and performed a beautiful and clean roundhouse kick. It accurately hit the man's face, and the man fell to the ground with a thud. His nose was broken. The man fell to the ground. He covered his nose and wailed in pain. Xiao Yichen reached out, grabbed him by the collar, and viciously punched his throat. The man's throat made a strange sound. His eyes widened, his face stiffened, and he stopped breathing. Xiao Yichen looked up and heard the sound of a gun being loaded. From the corner of his eye, he saw a cold glint flash across his face. Chapter 33-32. The moonlight shone in through the skylight. The remaining crew members held their guns tightly and aimed them at him. They shouted in broken Chinese, "Don't move. They have guns." Xiao Yichen's lips stiffened. He slowly stood up and raised his hands above his head with a cold expression. "Put the knife down." The man shouted at the top of his lungs again. It was as if the person standing in front of them wasn't an 8-year-old child, but a demon. Mu Yichen tilted his head. The corners of his lips curled into a devilish smile, as if he didn't understand. The man gestured with his hands and said, "Put the knife down." Little Yichen replied with an "oh" and pretended to put down the dagger in his hand. Only then did they relax a little. However, this slight relaxation caused him to narrow his eyes abruptly. The dagger in his hand flew out and drew a dazzling arc in the air. With a swoosh, it ruthlessly pierced one of the men's neck. Blood splattered on the ground. He wanted to shoot, but his body had already collapsed. The remaining 2 men panicked. They were so frightened that they were about to lose their minds. In their panic, they fired blindly and lost their aim. Little Yichen stretched out his leg and hooked the corpse on the ground with the tip of his toe. He pulled it up and used it as a shield in front of him. His right leg hooked onto the machete that had fallen not far away. He hooked it up, caught it firmly with his hand, and threw it back. Compared to the 2 good-for-nothings, Little Yichen had undergone rigorous training. Coupled with his calmness in the face of danger, he did not panic at all even when he was outnumbered. He aimed accurately at one of the men's chest and viciously plunged his dagger into it. The remaining man raised his gun with trembling hands. However, he realized that he had already fired all 6 bullets in the panic. He hurriedly wanted to reload, but Xiao Yichen was already walking towards him. He was quick to change the magazine, load the gun, and fire. Mu Yichen suddenly grabbed his wrist and pointed his gun to the side. Bang! 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 All 3 bullets hit the other man. Mu Yi-chen lifted his leg and kicked the man's crotch. The man cried out. His legs tightened and clamped down. Xiao Yi-chen jumped up and grabbed the man's hair. He dragged the man by his hair and walked towards the metal cage. Clang! A loud sound was heard. The man was in so much pain that he felt dizzy. Spare me. Spare me. Mu Yi-chen did not have the patience to listen to his nonsense, though. Grabbing the man's jaw with one hand and his neck with the other, he twisted his neck viciously. The man's throat joint was immediately dislocated. With a whimper, the man's head drooped weakly as he fell to the ground. The scene was a mess. And the pungent smell of gunpowder filled the entire cellar. Mu Yi-chen slowly stood up and surveyed the corpses on the ground. He carefully checked them again until he was sure that they were all dead. Finally, he heaved a sigh of relief and calmed himself down before walking over to his mother. Yun Shishir was so shocked that she couldn't speak. Xiao Yi-chen immediately comforted her. "Mommy, don't be afraid. You'll be fine." He lowered his head and looked at the lock of the metal cage to study it. Yun Shishir still had a lingering fear. She couldn't help but tremble with fear when she thought about how the 6 of them were against him. Mu Yi-chen locked the cellar door from the inside to ensure that no one would barge in. He then focused on studying the lock in his hand. "Yi-chen. You. Why are you here?" Chapter 33-33. You. Why are you here? Yun Shishir was still in shock. Xiao Yi-chen stuck out his tongue playfully and said, "Of course I'm here to save Mommy. Mommy, don't be afraid. I'll get you out right away." So effective, she looked at him with emotion. She was scared witless by the earlier scene. Even though she had witnessed Mu Yi-chen's formidable fighting skills, she would crumble if he were to suffer even the slightest bit of injury. There was a lock on the iron cage. Mu Yi-chen studied it for a long time and decided to try picking the lock. Even though such a lock could be opened with a gun, if he was not careful, he could accidentally hurt his mommy. After pondering for a long time, he suddenly opened the watch and broke off the needle inside. Using the thin needle, he bent it slightly with his fingers and inserted it into the lock. He held it and turned it. It was different from the locks he used to train with in the army. There was still some difficulty in picking this lock. After all, locks were different in different eras. With the change in technology, many of the lock-picking techniques from the past were no longer suitable for today's technology. Mu Yi-chen studied it for a long time. He lowered his head and pressed his ear against the lock to listen carefully to the mechanical structure inside. Generally speaking, the internal structure of a lock was very complicated. The better the lock, the more detailed the internal structure. The key shaft, the lock core, the lock tongue, the groove, the push plate, the blade, there were more than 10 parts. If one was not very familiar with locks, they would not be able to understand the main points. However, no matter what kind of lock it was, it could definitely be picked. This was because there was no technology in the world that could make a perfect lock. The perfect tool to pick a lock would be a paper clip. However, he did not carry such a tool with him. The length of the needle on the watch was limited and so was its stiffness. Hence, he had to be careful and hold his breath to listen to the movements inside and make a judgment based on the sound. Yun Shishir also kept quiet and looked at him nervously. Mu Yi-chen suddenly stood up. He ruffled his hair in frustration and furrowed his brows. "Is it because you can't open it?" Mu Yi-chen shook his head. He was afraid that she would be nervous and worried, so he quickly comforted her. "It's just that I don't have the right tools. I'm still missing something." "What do you lack?" Mu Yi-chen turned around and looked at the corpses lying in a pool of blood. He wanted to give it a try, so he searched them one by one. However, other than pistols and magazines, he didn't find anything useful. until he found a box of chewing gum on the last person's body. He opened it and sniffed it. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, he popped one into his mouth and chewed until it was as soft as mud. Then, he returned to the cage, spat out the gum, and slowly stuffed it into the lock. Yunshushu was dumbfounded. She didn't know what kind of technique he was using, but she didn't dare to make a sound for fear of disturbing his train of thought. It was Mui Chen who came up with the idea of chewing gum. When he found the chewing gum, he immediately thought that the chewing gum could be used to pick locks. Just now, he had carefully studied the structure of the lock. It was a one-word lock, so he could use the chewing gum to give it a try. However, he wasn't confident. He had only seen others try this method of picking locks, but he had never tried it himself. Chapter 33-34. After Mui Chen inserted the chewing gum into the lock, he pressed it with his finger until it was firmly embedded. Then, he straightened the needle and inserted it in. He kept turning it, and in less than 3 seconds, there was a click and the lock popped open. Yunshushu was stunned the whole time. Mui Chen opened the lock and opened the cage door. He saw that Yunshushu's wrists were still in handcuffs. Mui Chen was very familiar with handcuffs, so it didn't take him much effort to unlock it. However, the moment the lock was unlocked, there was a beeping sound coming from Yunshushu's body. Beep, beep, it sounded like the sound of some electronic device being activated. It sounded almost at the same time when the lock was unlocked. It was as if unlocking the lock had activated some kind of device. But this was just his guess. Mui Chen couldn't help but feel that it was strange. Because this sound wasn't unfamiliar to him. When he was in the army, during actual combat training, he had seen the scene of bomb defusing. This was the sound of a time bomb. Oh no, could it be? Yunshushu was about to get up, but Mui Chen pressed her back down and said in a deep voice, "Mommy, don't move." "What's wrong?" She couldn't help but feel nervous. Seeing Mui Chen's vigilant face, her breathing quickened. Mui Chen immediately smiled and comforted her, "Mommy, don't be nervous. From now on, you'll be in my care, okay?" "Okay." Mui Chen held his breath and listened attentively. Following the source of the sound, he suddenly lifted Yunshushu's belt. When the belt was undone, there was a time bomb placed on her waist. The reason why Yunshushu didn't know about the existence of this thing was that this time bomb was installed when she was unconscious. A linkage device. Mui Chen looked at the time bomb's fuse that was connected to the handcuffs. When the handcuffs were unlocked, the bomb would automatically activate and start the countdown. This was an extremely complicated linkage device. The time kept counting down. On the small rectangular screen, the numbers kept jumping. The countdown of 300 seconds was just a short 5 minutes. Yunshushu naturally didn't know what a linkage device was, but when she saw the rows of explosive tubes on her waist, she immediately realized what this thing was. Her face turned pale. Bomb. Yeah. She was frightened out of her wits at once. She had seen time bombs in movies a few times. Although the design was different, the difference was that the ones in the movies were all fake. In real life, once a bomb exploded, it would not have eyes at all. If an ordinary person saw this thing, it would undoubtedly be like seeing the Grim Reaper. They would definitely be scared witless. She immediately pushed him away and said, "Hurry up and leave, don't bother about me." He wise Huns *****, "Mommy, I'm Mommy's mommy, I'm Mommy, Mommy, I'm Mommy. Don't chase me away. Once the bomb explodes, you'll die." "Mommy, listen." Mui Chen took a deep breath and said, "I've learned some knowledge about defusing bombs." Although he was comforting her, the reality was that there was no such thing as a bomb disposal expert in the army. Most of the time, they used robots to defuse the bombs. Chapter 33-35. After all, compared to robots, human lives were more important. It was better not to use humans. The loss of a robot was small, but if a human died, it would be hard to explain. The structure of a bomb was indeed simple, but sometimes, the simpler it was, the more difficult it was to solve it. Such a thing could take a human life, so it was even more difficult to test one's luck. Mu Chen said in a low voice, "Mommy, this is a time bomb." In other words, its device is designed to be able to explode. Some bombs were made in time by pulling the fuse and detonating it immediately. The design of a time bomb could prevent it from exploding. This meant that there was a chance of survival. Even if it was very slim, there was still a chance. There were only 4 minutes left. Mu Chen swallowed hard and slowly removed the shell of the time bomb. His hands were very fast, but it still took him 20 seconds. After removing it, what was exposed to the air was the intricate wiring inside the bomb. There were many types of time bombs. According to his understanding, there were 3 types of bombs: electric detonation, and black gunpowder. Bombs generally only needed to be removed directly. Without the bomb was useless. Even a pistol could not break it. No matter what, it would not explode. Black gunpowder was a child's play. Other than that, was used by the military and was more common. For someone like Dietrich, it was impossible for him to get his hands on such a thing. Bombs were very fierce and had an extremely bad temper. The slightest vibration would cause it to explode. In other words, as long as one stood up, the bomb would explode. The other bombs were octogenium, tie-in, and C4. These were all extremely high-end bombs. They were rarely seen on the market. Even many terrorists could not get their hands on such things. Under normal circumstances, they would only appear in extreme situations. Moreover, the structure was extremely complicated. If one encountered these, it would be very difficult to remove them. However, after some research, Mu Chen found out that this bomb was an electric detonator. Usually, such bombs needed to be wired. Of course, it was not like those commonly seen on TV where one could choose between a red and a blue wire. Instead, it needed to be cut off to activate the battery and power circuit. Most of the detonation current was direct current. In this way, once the power source was destroyed, the bomb would lose its function. Without electricity, it wouldn't explode. However, it sounded very simple, but the wiring of such a device was very complicated. It was very difficult to distinguish between the power cord, the detonator cord, and the detonator cord. Mu Chen counted and found that there were about 10 wires. These wires were densely packed and orderly, but they were all of the same color. If he made a mistake, he would really be finished. Even if it was cut correctly, there was a certain probability of triggering a capacitive reverse detonation, which was impossible to guard against. The situation suddenly became a little tricky. Mu Chen fiddled with the threads, cold sweat seeping out of his forehead and trickling down his cheeks. Yun Shishir looked at his nervous face and realized that this bomb seemed to be very tricky. If it was not handled properly, it would be fatal. Chapter 33-36. Mu Chen curled his lips calmly. He lowered his head and looked at the wires. He said calmly, "There are still 3 minutes before the explosion. Even if I can't save you, I can still stay with you for 3 minutes." He suddenly looked up. His eyes were red, but he said slowly, "Mommy, I promised Daddy that I would bring you home safe and sound. I can't go back on my word." He couldn't go back on his word. Daddy was still waiting for them to come home. He couldn't leave Mommy behind. Yun Shishir suddenly choked up. "But, you can't force yourself, okay? If there's really no hope, you must run." There's no need to stay and risk your life. Xiao Yichen suddenly smiled. He looked up at her and asked gently, Mommy must be worried that you'll implicate me, right? Yun Shishir's lips trembled. Sometimes, I have to say that Mommy is really weak. You're just like a tree branch that can be broken by the wind. Take this time, for example. Mommy, you're really stupid. Do you really believe anyone's words so easily? No matter how close you are to them, they will betray you one day. But Mommy seems to be really innocent. You believe anyone's words so easily. After a pause, Xiao Yichen changed the topic. So God must have sent Daddy to your side because he couldn't stand it anymore. He gave birth to me and Yu, two powerful guardians. I think that protecting Mommy must be Yu's and my life's mission. No matter what, we can give up everything, but Mommy can't leave us alone. Yun Shishir was stunned. She was extremely touched. Xiao Yichen smiled with tears in his eyes. You're very kind. Even though some people in this world don't like this kind of kindness, because humans are born selfish. This kind of selfishness is the root of human nature. But being selfish isn't wrong because you only have one life. Everyone wants to live well and protect themselves. But being kind isn't wrong. Yun Shishir bit her lip hard, but Xiao Yichen continued, Mommy, did you know? Before I met you, I felt that the world was cold. When she was in the Mu family, she had to be careful at every step. Everyone was scheming in the dark for their own benefit. But ever since I met you, every day with you, I feel like the sun is shining brightly. Because Mommy was really gentle. It makes me feel warm. As he spoke, he took a deep breath and wiped away his tears. So, I can't lose you. This is my bottom line. As he spoke, he lowered his head again and focused on identifying the direction of the line. Yun Shishir smiled and planted a kiss on his forehead. Her heart calmed down and she no longer felt so fearful. The direction of each line was extremely complicated. It wasn't because the lines were intricate, but because Xiao Yichen had to use a lot of brain power just to mark the lines clearly. After marking the lines clearly, he had to check the direction of the lines and study the function of each line. Before they knew it, 3 minutes had passed. Xiao Yichen had already eliminated 5 lines. 3 of them were lead lines and the other 2 were timer lines. Chapter 33-37. However, in reality, such wires were only used to stop the timer and detonate in time. Once they were cut, the countdown would stop and they would detonate 5 seconds later. It was easy to confuse such wires with power cables. However, Mu Yichen had some experience. The more important the wires were, the shorter and longer they were, the more dangerous they were. 120, 119, 118, the seconds continued to count down. Mu Yichen's face was already covered in cold sweat. Sweat flowed into his eyes and blurred his vision. Yun Shishir immediately wiped it away for him. The more he studied it, the more he hated that cunning Dietrich to the core. Damn it! How on earth did they design such a complicated circuit? Mu Yichen ignored the cold sweat all over his body and tried to remain calm. He continued to arrange the wires. After all the wires were classified, the alarm went off. There was only a 20-second countdown left. He sucked in a breath of cold air and casually pulled out a dagger from his waist. Flicking it open, he listed out 2 of the wires. The blade of the dagger pressed against the 2 wires. A cold light reflected on his face, dazzling his eyes. Mu Yichen's throat was blocked, and his hands involuntarily trembled. Mommy, Mu Yichen suddenly raised his head and held her hands tightly. He planted a kiss on the back of her hands and revealed a bright smile. No matter what, we'll be together forever. I won't leave you. Yun Shishir was choked with sobs. She could only nod her head randomly as tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. Although she believed in her son's ability, fate was unpredictable. Other than fear and uneasiness, she felt more heartache. How could this little guy bear so much for her? Yun Shishir hugged him and said word by word, "I believe in you, Ichen. Don't worry. Do as you wish." Okay. Mu Ichen pinched the two wires. Only one of them was a power cable. He wasn't sure if the other was a condom lead or some other wire. However, he couldn't find any other condom lead. These two lines were the only two life-saving lines that he could use to save his life. However, he didn't dare to cut off the power cord that had already been confirmed. If he cut it off, the device would have a capacitive reverse detonation. Then, cutting off the power cord would also trigger the bomb. In that case, he could only pin his hopes on another path. Although he was not that confident, it was worth the risk. Mu Yichen gritted his teeth and pinched one of the threads. He closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths. In the last few seconds, he cut off the thread. The timer on the time bomb let out a prolonged sound. It was so sharp that it was somewhat ear-piercing. The number stopped at 003 seconds and didn't move anymore. Mu Yichen was so shocked that his eyes widened. Only when he confirmed that the timer had stopped did he realize that he had cut off the fuse. However, he did not relax immediately. Just in case, he immediately cut off the power cord, and the timer immediately went off. Yun Shishir was so nervous that she held her breath. Even when she saw the timer go off, the sweat on her face continued to roll down. Mu Yichen finally slumped to the ground. The series of stressful events just now, especially at the critical moment, had almost exhausted all his mental strength. Now that he had relaxed, he was exhausted and weak all over. Chapter 33-38. He felt exhausted, as though he had just finished a huge battle. His mind was blank. Seeing him like this, Yun Shishir roughly understood the situation and knew that they were out of danger. However, she still did not dare to move, for fear that the slightest carelessness would lead to another crisis. Mu Yichen slowly sat up, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, and smiled with lingering fear. He suddenly pounced on Yun Shishir and snuggled into her arms. He hugged her so tightly that it was as though he had found a lost treasure. Yun Shishir also hugged him tightly. She had held back her tears during the nervous process earlier, but now, she suddenly felt like crying. Yichen, thank you. At the most critical moment, he did not give up. Mu Yichen cried and laughed at the same time. Even though he had amazing courage, he was still scared out of his wits just now. The reason why his hands were trembling so much was because he was really prepared to detonate the bomb. He did not expect that the heavens would favor him. This was his luck. Mu Yichen could not be bothered to be affectionate with her. He immediately removed the bomb from her waist and threw it out of the skylight. Yun Shishir stood up and asked in confusion, "Where are we going now?" Mu Yichen said, "Mommy, from now on, follow me. Do whatever I ask you to do." Okay. But, Yun Shishir said hesitantly, "This is a cruise ship. It's no different from a prison on the sea. How are you going to take me out of here?" Mu Yichen smiled. "So, I'm going to the cockpit right away." After a pause, he asked again, "Mommy, are you scared?" "No. With you around, I'm not afraid of anything." Yun Shishir shook her head firmly. Mu Yichen smiled. "That's good. Follow me." Yun Shishir immediately lifted the hem of her dress and followed him. However, just as she stepped out of the cage, she was tripped. She looked back and realized that her long dress was caught by a metal wire. What a nuisance. Yun Shishir gritted her teeth. She couldn't care less about her image. She tore off a large part of her skirt, revealing a pair of long, smooth legs. Mu Yichen held her hand and opened the door, but he didn't rush out. He knelt on the deck and pressed his ear to the deck, using the sound transmission method to determine the people nearby. Through the deck, he made a preliminary judgment that there were people in the vicinity. He immediately pulled Yunshushu to the right. On the way here, he had already drawn a rough map in his mind. Therefore, he had a rough idea of the direction to the cockpit. Cruise ships were more or less the same. Most of the cockpits were on the second or third floor, while they were on the first basement floor. Mu-I-chen first settled Yunshushu in a corner, then he went forward to open up a path. Just now, he took away the guns and ammunition from the few pitiful crew members and silenced them. He loaded the pistol and carried it on his back at the entrance of the corridor. Then, he heard someone coming downstairs. From the sound of the footsteps, he could roughly tell that there were two people. He held his breath and focused. Suddenly, he thought of something and immediately put the gun back into the gun case at his waist. When the person came closer, he suddenly dodged. His movements were agile and fast, like a ghost. Chapter 33-39. The other man had just taken out his gun, but before he could load it, Mu-I-chen grabbed his wrist and viciously struck his elbow joint with his other hand. In an instant, the man's arm was bent at a strange angle. Ah! Just as he was about to scream, Mu-I-chen clasped his jaw and twisted it hard, dislocating his jaw. That person looked at him in horror, as if he was looking at a scary monster. Mu-I-chen did not give him any chance to struggle. He grabbed his throat tightly and squeezed it hard, causing his throat joint to crack. He dragged the two corpses to one side and hid them in a corner. After cleaning up the scene, he returned to Yunshushu's side. "Mommy, let's go." The reason why he did not intend to use a gun was because using a gun would cause the scene to be covered in blood. Mommy would be scared if she saw it, but this was secondary. The main reason was that if he dirtied the scene, it would be too eye-catching and it would be easy to be discovered. Compared to the tall and strong crew members, he was too skinny and small. But this was a disadvantage, but it was also an advantage. Although if they really fought, no matter how strong he was, it would be difficult for him to fight against a large number of people. But it was because he was so skinny that he was able to be as agile as a wolf. He carefully carried on his back. Along the way, after dealing with a few crew members, he brought Yunshushu to the cockpit. In the cockpit, the co-pilot was sitting on the chair. At this moment, a nimble figure flashed past the door and opened the door of the cockpit, quietly sneaking behind him. Before the captain could react to who it was, he was punched in the head. Mu-I-chen picked up the man's tottering body and twirled the dagger in his hand nimbly. The pitiful man only felt a chill in his throat as hot blood spurted onto the passenger seat. The stench of blood assailed his nostrils. He spared the captain's life. The little fellow quickly used the same method to escape into the engine room, leaving a crooked corpse behind as he returned to the cockpit. The captain was scared half to death. He curled up in a corner, trembling. Mu-I-chen took out his gun and aimed it at his temple. He coldly said in broken English, "Do you want to live? I'm begging you. Don't kill me." The captain begged humbly. Mu-I-chen pressed the gun a little harder. "If you're obedient, I won't kill you." "Yes. Yes. I promise I'll be obedient." Mu-I-chen took out a pair of handcuffs and cuffed his left hand to a fixed position. He ordered, "Deactivate the alarm." Most cruise ships had radar warning devices. Once other ships or units approached, the warning device would be activated. The only reason he spared the captain's life was because he didn't like killing people. The captain looked weak and powerless and didn't seem to be a threat to him. More importantly, he didn't know how to operate a cruise ship. If the cruise ship lost its helmsman and lost control, the consequences would be unimaginable. To be safe, he did this. The captain nodded in a daze. He couldn't help but hesitate. Mu-I-chen stabbed the dagger in his hand into his thigh. Ah! The The captain gritted his teeth and cried out in pain. Mu Yi-chen grabbed him by the collar and warned him coldly, "Do as I say." "Yes. Yes." The captain was in so much pain that he couldn't breathe properly. He immediately pulled down a lever. There was a ding-ding-ding sound and the screen showed the ALCLAL. The alarm had been deactivated. Chapter 3340. Continues sailing as usual. Yes. Understood. Mu Yi-chen pulled Yun Shishir into the cockpit and locked the door. "Mommy, this is the safest place for now." Yun Shishir nodded in a daze. Mu Yi-chen had already cleaned up the corpses in the cockpit. She suddenly felt uneasy when she saw the little guy covered in blood. She didn't want to see Mu Yi-chen kill anyone, but she knew that if Mu Yi-chen didn't get rid of all these people, they would be the ones getting rid of. Wasn't it always the law of the jungle in this world? Mu Yi-chen didn't know what she was thinking about. He took out the necklace around his neck and opened it gently. He pressed a hidden button and the location information was immediately sent to Mu Yaja's handheld terminal. At the port, the sea breeze blew against their faces. Gong Jie's armed ship was already ready to set off. 2 hours ago, he had rushed over. He happened to pass by the nearby waters, so he was still in time. Other than the armed ship, he also brought along more than 10 armed helicopters and 2 nuclear submarines. Of course, he had also prepared $3 billion USD. Alas, while Gong Jia was prepared to get the $3 billion US, Dietrich would have to be alive to get it. Mu Yaja's handheld terminal vibrated. He opened the interface and saw that Mu Yi-chen had sent a location signal. He was excited and looked up at Gong Jia. "We can set off now." Gong Jia had been waiting for a long time. When he heard this, his handsome face showed a trace of surprise. "You've received the signal." "Yes." Before the 2 little guys set off, Yu and Mu Yi-chen both wore a necklace. This necklace was a signal receiver and could also send location information. It was also at this time that Mu Yi-chen realized that Yu had invented such a terrifying technology. A dagger disguised as a belt, a signal transmitter hidden in the necklace, and a smart nanochip implanted under the skin. These were concepts that he had only seen in science fiction magazines, but Yu had already put them to use. "Let's go." Mu Yaja sent the location information to the cargo ship's navigation system and followed the route to the destination. Compared to Dietrich's cruise ship, Gong Jie's armed ship could be said to be an extremely crazy existence. Its speed was top-notch and it was fully armed. When Mu Yaja first boarded the ship, he was shocked. The so-called ship was only from Gong Jie's mouth. A certain man always liked to use understated words to describe things that were too heaven-defying. Although it was called ship, in fact, it was actually a second-generation aircraft carrier developed by the former Soviet Union. An aircraft carrier. Even Mu Yaja was surprised. One had to know that even though the military was very advanced, not every country had an aircraft carrier. Even a superpower like the United States of America only had 10 Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in service. The other 2 were super nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, and 12 aircraft carriers were patrolling the sea. They were the world's undisputed super maritime overlords. Many countries did not have an aircraft carrier in service. All of them dreamed of having an aircraft carrier that they had developed on their own. Having an aircraft carrier meant having a strong military force. Chapter 3341. Having an aircraft carrier meant that the military forces were powerful. However, such an aircraft carrier that was not inferior to a super nuclear-powered one was just a toy ship to Gong Jia. This was also the reason why Hurricane Group was so fearful. If Hurricane were to use all of its strength, then its armed forces would be comparable to any of the 5 joint Union member nations. Although it was about a few hundred kilometers away from the target, it was not worth mentioning to Gong Jia. If he sped up, he would be able to reach the target in about an hour. After all, his aircraft carrier was a super-nuclear-powered one. Compared to nuclear-powered, the power of Dietrich's broken ship was nothing. After Mu Yichen sent the location, he stood up and glanced at the captain. Then, he said to Yun Shishir, "Mommy, can you do me a favor?" Now, I'm going to look for Yu. You stay here and keep an eye on him. Don't let him do anything." Yun Shishir was shocked when she heard this. Yu is also on this ship. Yes. Xiao Yichen nodded. I came with him. But I'm worried that he's in danger, so I'm going to save him now. Yun Shishir nodded quickly. Yes, go quickly. Mu Yichen immediately passed the dagger and pistol to her and reminded her, you must protect yourself. If he dares to play any tricks, let him have a taste of his own medicine. Okay. Mommy should know how to use a gun, right? Yun Shishir nodded. Yes, I learned it on the set. Okay, Mommy, I believe in you. After Mu Yichen finished speaking, he left immediately. There was a long distance between the cockpit and the VIP cabin. It was equivalent to going from the bow to the stern of the ship. When he left, he deliberately locked the door of the cockpit. The windows of the cockpit were made of bulletproof glass. This way, they could prevent outsiders from entering. After all, he didn't feel at ease leaving his mommy alone there. But compared to Mommy, he was more worried about Yu. After all, Dietrich was a cunning old fox. His methods were sinister and ruthless. He didn't know what methods he would use to deal with Yu. Sneaking all the way to the first floor, Mu Yichen walked out of the corridor and was caught off guard when he bumped into 3 patrolling sailors. Mu Yichen was shocked and immediately ran back. The 3 sailors saw it, but before they could see it clearly, they felt a shadow flash before their eyes. They looked at each other, vigilantly pulled out their pistols, loaded them, and walked to the entrance of the corridor with their backs against the wall. They turned around and looked, but there was no one. Where is he? Just as the 3 of them were confused, Mu Yichen appeared above their heads. His hands gripped the door frame of the cabin roof, and his legs kicked out cleanly. His straightened feet hit the faces of the 2 people at the front. The 2 fell to the ground. The other one nervously raised his wrist and was about to shoot, but Mu Yichen didn't give him a chance to aim. His legs clamped the man's neck, and with a flip, he threw him to the ground. He snatched the gun from the man's hand and shot at close range with a bang. The man who was about to sneak up on him from behind had a headshot. The power of a bullet was not to be underestimated. Especially when shooting at close range, as long as one aimed at the head, there was a 100% chance of a headshot. Chapter 33-42. Fresh blood splattered all over his body. He immediately jumped up and loaded his gun. Bang! Bang! He fired at the other 2 men. One of them, who had been shot in the chest, was still struggling. Mu Yichen walked over, raised his leg, and stepped on his neck. His right hand gripped the man's jaw and twisted his throat. He threw the 3 men into the sea and quickly cleaned up the floor. When he passed by the banquet hall, he noticed that it was brightly lit. He looked in through the window and saw many well-dressed people gathered. What's going on? Mu Yichen looked out of the window suspiciously. The guests were gathered in the hall, but the strange thing was that everyone was wearing half a mask that covered their eyes. It was extremely strange at first glance. Everyone surrounded the stage and was in high spirits. In the hall, the music was melodious and the guests were chatting and laughing. It looked like a simple banquet. However, Mu Yichen still found something strange. An MC was standing on the stage. Behind him, a red curtain slowly rose. Next, we will be showing the 3rd piece of art. It's called A Pearl of the Sea. The starting price is 500,000 USD. As the red curtain rose, a rectangular iron cage slowly appeared. The red curtain rose very slowly. The music suddenly stopped. Therefore, the strange sound from behind the red curtain could be heard more clearly. It was the sound of a person struggling. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. Mu Chen widened his eyes in shock. It was not because of the seemingly strange auction, but because of the woman whose hands and feet were tied up in the cage. The woman's 4 limbs were tied up. Her face was also covered with a mask. Her mouth was also tightly covered with black tape. She had obviously regained consciousness and realized that she was tightly tied up. She was afraid and uneasy, so she struggled fiercely. Although her face could not be seen clearly and her voice could not be heard, the mask only covered her eyes. It was not difficult to see the woman's delicate appearance through her delicate nose and lips. She had golden hair and fair skin. It was obvious that she was of European descent. I don't know if everyone has seen it, but this piece of art is quite exquisite. The starting price is 500,000 USD. The highest bidder wins. When the woman heard the host's voice, she began to tremble nervously. Everyone held their breaths in shock. Whispers could be heard from time to time in the crowd. This is a stunner. 500,000, the starting price is not high. I want it. Someone immediately raised the number plate. 1 million USD. The host said, "All right, Mr. Number 10, 1 million USD once." Immediately, another lady raised her paddle. 2 million. The host's face was flushed red. Number 24 lady, 2 million USD once. 5 million. Everyone below the stage sucked in a breath of cold air. The sudden change was too great, and everyone became nervous. Mu Chen didn't know the identities of the people gathered here, but they were probably rich and respectable. The host shouted, "Number 50, 5 million going once. 5 million going twice. Are there no more bids?" The host shook his head. "What a pity. She's a rare beauty." He walked to the cage and unlocked it. Then, he slowly took off the mask on the woman's face. Chapter 33-43. Her delicate eyebrows were exposed in front of everyone. The woman was even more panicked. Her eyes were wide open, and her long eyelashes were trembling. She was terrified. She shook her head desperately, as if she was begging. Tears kept falling from the corners of her eyes, making her look miserable and pitiful. 10 million USD. Someone immediately raised their number and continued to bid. The MC was not in a hurry to call out but pretended to be mysterious. "I wonder if everyone has heard Nightingale's singing voice." As he spoke, he removed the black tape that sealed the woman's mouth. As soon as it was undone, the woman begged, "Please, no, oh my God." Many people revealed intoxicated expressions. "Her voice is sweet, just like Nightingale's. Ha! I like her sweet voice." 20 million USD. The auction was in full swing. Mu Chen felt incredulous. What was going on? Auctioning a living person. What a disregard for the law. Mu Chen looked at the woman who was exquisitely dressed and wearing a beautiful gown. He suddenly realized why he was also wearing a gorgeous gown when he saw his mother. Could it be, he finally realized, his mother was also an auction item? He had heard from Yu that Beatrice was the leader of the dark web. He had a huge network that specialized in international transactions. However, in this global international trade, what was being traded was not ordinary goods, but living people. He suddenly felt a lingering fear. He did not know what would have happened to his mother if he and Yu had arrived a little later. Would she have been auctioned off like this woman? In the end, the woman was bought by a man in his 50s at the high price of 50 million USD. In the end, the woman was wrapped up and sent to an unknown place. The MC returned to the stage and the red curtain fell. He raised his wine glass and drank it in one gulp. Then, he said, "Next up is tonight's finale item, Yun Shan Shuri. Everyone, please wait and see." Yun Shan Shuri, Xiao Yichen's heart skipped a beat. Just by hearing the name, he knew that the finale item was his mother. The host whispered to a woman beside him. The woman nodded and quickly left through the secret door. When Mu Yichen saw this, he immediately knew that this woman had probably gone to the dungeon. However, Yun Shishir was no longer there. He didn't know which way the woman left. The secret passages on the cruise ship extended in all directions. He couldn't grasp her whereabouts. No, he had to save Yu as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. "Who's there?" Not far away, a man's scolding voice could be heard. Mu Yichen turned around and looked at the man. He smiled and said, "I'm just passing by." Passing by. Xiao Yichen spoke in Chinese, so the men didn't understand what he was saying. However, it wasn't until Xiao Yichen jumped down from the box by the window and exposed himself to the moonlight that the men saw that he was covered in blood and had a sinister smile on his face. "You!" Before the men could react, Xiao Yichen pulled out the dagger from his waist belt and a cold gleam flashed across. A few seconds later, the corpses fell to the ground. Before they could even close their eyes, they breathed their last. Chapter 33-44. In the cockpit, Yun Shishir was drenched in cold sweat. Her palm, which was tightly gripping the pistol, was covered in sticky cold sweat. She stared intently at the captain's every move, full of vigilance. The captain pretended to be calm as he steered the rudder. However, he kept looking at her from the corner of his eye. He reached out tentatively and pressed a few buttons. The lights on the control panel immediately lit up. Yun Shishir didn't control the rudder, but she remembered that there was a push rod that had an alarm. Xiao Yichen said that as long as he didn't push the push rod, everything would be fine. Hence, Yun Shishir was vigilant of his every move. However, what she didn't know was that there was more than one way to push the push rod. If he pressed another button, the push rod would automatically push down. She heard a creaking sound. She didn't know what button he had pressed, but the push rod slowly slid down. Suddenly, the alarm sounded in the cockpit. Yun Shishir heard the alarm outside the cockpit and looked at the push rod. It had been pulled. Mu Yichen was halfway there when he heard the alarm and frowned. Yun Shishir was flustered and exasperated. She questioned him, "What did you do?" However, the captain continued to steer the rudder as if nothing had happened. She gritted her teeth and tried to push the push rod. However, the push rod was locked in place and couldn't move at all. No matter how hard she tried, the push rod wouldn't budge. Yun Shishir raised the gun and pointed it between his eyebrows. She ordered, "I'm ordering you to remove the alarm." However, the captain was unmoved. He still looked calm and composed as if he was sure that she wouldn't dare to shoot. She didn't know how to steer the rudder. He was the only captain on the cruise ship. If the ship wanted to move, it could only rely on him. If he died, everyone on the ship would be done for. Yun Shishir saw that he didn't seem to be threatened by her. She sneered, "Do you think I won't dare to shoot?" She loaded the gun and pulled the trigger. The captain glanced at her from the corner of his eye and waved his hand abruptly, causing her gun to fall to the ground. She was caught off guard and fell to the ground with a kick. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, and the pistol slipped not far away. She immediately got up and wanted to pick it up. The captain stepped hard on the back of her hand. Yun Shishir cried out in pain and her face turned red. One of his hands was handcuffed, but the other hand was free. He immediately reached out to grab the pistol. Based on the current situation, if he were to obtain the gun, then the situation would be one-sided. She would definitely die in the hands of this man. No. How could Yun Shishir let him have his way? Mu Yi-chen had given this place to her, which meant that he trusted her. How could she let him down? Yun Shishir didn't know where the strength came from, but she suddenly hugged the captain's leg and bit down viciously. She used almost all of her strength. The captain was in so much pain that he instinctively kicked her and she fell to the ground. Because of this kick, Yun Shishir's shoulder was slightly dislocated. However, she ignored the pain and sat up with a face full of cold sweat. She pounced on the pistol and grabbed it in her hand. She got it. She was pleasantly surprised. She immediately rolled to the side and put the pistol away. She stood up and held the dagger in her hand. She raised her hand viciously and stabbed the captain's thigh. She used almost all of her strength. Ah! Chapter 33:45. The captain was in so much pain that he let out a heart-wrenching cry. Yun Shishir wiped away the blood that had splattered on her face. She stood up and pressed the dagger firmly against his neck. She said word by word in English, "I'm warning you, don't play any tricks. Deactivate the alarm." The captain was in so much pain that his eyes were about to burst. His eyes were red as he shouted at Yun Shishir, "Kill me if you can. You're really not afraid of death." Yun Shishir gritted her teeth and pressed the dagger a little tighter. The sharp dagger quickly cut through a layer of his skin and blood gushed out. The captain was stunned. Now, he could no longer feel the pain on his neck. However, the sticky blood that flowed into his collar made him realize that she really dared to do it. He gritted his teeth and stood there for a long time until Yun Shishir raised the dagger in her hand again. He immediately clenched his teeth and pressed a button to reset the plunger to its original position. The alarm was deactivated immediately. Xiao Yi-chen stood there for a long time. Originally, he was worried about Yun Shishir and wanted to go back to the cockpit to check on the situation. However, since the alarm was deactivated, it meant that his mommy was safe and sound. This was her signal to him that she was safe. Mu Yi-chen didn't dare to hesitate anymore and rushed to the VIP cabin. Hearing the alarm, Dietrich stood up abruptly and walked to the door. He opened it and looked around. He grabbed a sailor guarding the door and questioned, "What's going on?" I don't know, go check on the situation." Dietrich returned to the VIP cabin and thought about it. He felt that something was wrong. Yu sat on the sofa with his hands cuffed to the armrests. He couldn't move. When he heard the alarm, he also felt that something was strange and was a little confused. What was going on? Did something happen to his mommy and Xiao Yi-chen? He was a little worried. While he was lost in thought, Dietrich walked up to him and grabbed him by the collar. He questioned, "You dare to play tricks with me? I'll take your life." "Dietrich, are you joking?" Facing him, Yu was not flustered. Instead, he coldly retorted, "We have 2 children and my mother. What tricks do we have to play? I've been thinking about something. You 2 kids actually dared to board my ship. That in itself is inconceivable. I don't have any weapons on me. How can I pose any threat to you?" After pausing for a moment, Yu said calmly, "Dietrich, I didn't expect you to be so cowardly." Yu's unconscious provocation completely angered Dietrich. He raised his hand and punched him hard. Yu's palm-sized face was slapped to the side. Just as he was about to hit him, the panicked voice of his men came from the door. "Boss. Oh no, he's gone." Dietrich suddenly came back to his senses and glared at him. "What do you mean?" "The finale of the auction is missing." Dietrich was furious. "Gone. How could he be missing? We sent people to the dungeon, but they only saw a few corpses. The person you wanted is no longer there." "Impossible." Dietrich shouted in anger. How could this be? He sent a few strong men to guard one person. There were 2 locks, one of which was a linkage. Once the handcuffs on Yunshusher's hands were opened, it would activate the bomb. Chapter 33:46. How did she disappear for no reason? The lock on the cage was pried open. Inside the cage, we found handcuffs and a dismantled bomb. Yu turned pale with fright when he heard this. How could Dietrich be so ruthless as to tie a bomb to Mommy? However, when he heard that the bomb had been dismantled, he was relieved that Xiao Yichen must have dismantled the bomb. Dietrich walked in front of his subordinate in disbelief. His face was red with anger. What did you say? Don't tell me that an 8-year-old child dismantled a bomb with his bare hands. He paused as he thought of the alarm. He reacted quickly and shouted, Go check the cockpit. Yes. Yes, the man was so frightened that he scrambled away. Dietrich returned to the room and walked over. He grabbed Yu and threw him to the ground. Then, he stepped on his chest and stomped on it. Brat! I knew that you wouldn't be simple if you dared to trespass on my cruise ship. I've underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so capable. Yu's chest was being stomped on so hard that he couldn't breathe. His face was red and his forehead was sweating profusely. He gritted his teeth and his eyes were bloodshot. It was difficult to distinguish between red and green on his fair face. Dietrich seemed to feel that it was not enough to vent his anger, and he threw another punch. An adult's strength was not something an average child could handle. Yu was weak and couldn't take the second punch. Hence, he was already in a daze after the second punch. His gaze wandered and a sticky liquid flowed from his nose. He raised his hand and wiped it away forcefully. However, he sneered, Dietrich, you've lost. Dietrich glared at him. Shut up. You pitiful little bug, how can you be so arrogant when you're about to die? Do you believe that I can crush you to death? Behind him, the cabin door was kicked open. Dietrich turned around in shock. Before he could see who made the sound, he heard a loud bang. The 2 subordinates that Dietrich had ordered to check the situation in the cockpit were kicked in by Xiao Yichen. Dietrich took a closer look and saw that the 2 of them were no longer breathing. They lay limp on the ground, completely dead. Yu. When Xiao Yichen saw Yu lying on the ground and her clothes covered in blood, his eyes turned red. He pulled out his gun and was about to load it when Dietrich immediately dodged. Bang! Bang! 2 gunshots rang out. One shot, aimed at Dietrich's calf, went through the muscle. The other bullet was aimed at the handcuffs on Yu's head. The bullet accurately broke the handcuffs and Yu immediately regained her freedom. Their pistols had already run out of ammunition. Xiao Yichen threw the gun aside and rushed over. He carried Yu and checked his injuries. How are you? Yu smiled weakly and only cared about comforting him. I'm fine. How could he be fine? He lost so much blood. Xiao Yichen's hands trembled with heartache. He hugged Yu's shoulders in frustration and said in a choked voice, I'm sorry, I'm late. Behind them came the sound of stumbling footsteps. Chapter 33:47. Xiao Yichen looked back and saw that Dietrich had been shot in the leg. Dietrich had pounced behind him with a machete in his hand and was about to slash it at Xiao Yichen. Be careful. Yu did not know where he got his strength from, but he pushed him away harshly. Seeing that the machete was about to cleave little Yichen's neck, he subconsciously reached out to block it. A crisp sound was heard. The amethyst necklace on Yu's wrist happened to block the sharp blade. However, the necklace broke and the amethyst crystals fell to the ground. Ah, necklace! Yu's eyes were filled with panic. Even when he was tortured by Dietrich just now, he did not show any signs of nervousness. When he saw the necklace break, he instantly felt helpless and panicked. He reached out to catch the broken crystals. The amethyst crystals fell to the ground. This was given to him by Xiao Yichen. They each had a necklace, but he had broken it. At that moment, his mind was filled with the necklace and he did not care about anything else. Xiao Yichen saw that the necklace was broken and his eyes were filled with hatred. He quickly got up and snatched the machete from Dietrich's hand. He slashed Dietrich's thigh and accurately severed the meridians in his thigh. Ah! Dietrich clenched his teeth and groaned in pain. He immediately stood up again. Mu Yichen got up and kicked him in the chest. With a thud, he staggered and knelt on the ground. "Dietrich!" yelled little Yichen through gritted teeth. Grabbing his brother's collar, he raised his fist and was about to give him a painful punch when he heard the man's words. However, Dietrich suddenly stretched out his hands and clenched them into fists. Between his fingers were two thin and long steel needles. They were thick and long, and they were aimed at Xiao Yichen's abdomen. Mu Yichen quickly grabbed both of Dietrich's hands, but it was too late. One of the steel needles pierced his abdomen. Ugh! Mu Yichen's body swayed slightly. Because of this stab, he subconsciously curled up his body in pain. Dietrich seized the opportunity and viciously punched Xiao Yichen's body. Like a thin sheet of paper, Xiao Yichen's body flew several meters away and fell to the ground. Dietrich slowly stood up and walked towards him. Xiao Yichen straightened his body with great difficulty. He covered his bleeding abdomen and stared at him with a burning gaze. He watched as he picked up the scimitar from the ground and charged towards him. "Die!" Dietrich roared, but just as he raised his hand, Yu raised the vase in her hand and smashed it at the back of his head. Bang! The vase shattered. Dietrich shuddered violently. His grip loosened, and the machete fell to the ground. Mu Yichen immediately stretched out his leg, hooked it over, and held it tightly in his hand. The next moment, the man fell to the ground weakly and fainted. Yu stood up and walked in front of Xiao Yichen. She stretched her hand out to him. "Looks like Big Brother isn't omnipotent. You can't do it without me." Mu Yichen smiled at him and said, "Yeah, I can't do without you, Yu." He extended his hand and the two little lads held each other's hands tightly. Chapter 33:48. How is it? Is it serious? Mu Yichen shook his head and comforted him, "It's okay. It's just a small injury." Yu was still nervous. Xiao Yichen said helplessly, Yu, I've suffered worse injuries before. It's okay. Don't worry, okay? Okay. Yu nodded, but he looked guilty. Xiao Yichen wiped his hands on his trousers until the blood on his hands was clean. He then reached out and patted his head gently. Then he stood up, walked over to Dietrich, and took off his tie. Yu watched from the side. He tied Dietrich's hands behind his back, hooked his legs up, and tied his hands and feet behind his back with the tie. His tying technique was different from usual. It was the professional tying technique used by the police. He was tied up tightly and couldn't break free no matter how hard he tried. He took out a pair of handcuffs. His movements were a little too big and affected his wound, but he didn't make a sound. He handcuffed Dietrich to a pillar at the side. After making sure that everything was fine, he turned to Yu and said, "Let's go find Mommy." Okay. Yu nodded and asked worriedly, "Where's Mommy?" "In the cockpit. We have to hurry over to prevent any accidents." "Did you send a signal to Daddy?" Yu suddenly asked anxiously. Xiao Yichen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Yu, do you think I'm stupid? When I rescued Mommy, I sent a location to Daddy's terminal. It's been more than half an hour. Daddy and Uncle should be here soon. Yu was completely relieved. The two little lads held hands and walked to the cockpit. Yun Shishir stayed in the cockpit. She stared at the captain with a burning gaze, but he looked exhausted. He forced himself to steer the ship, but blood kept flowing out of his wound. Yun Shishir couldn't help but worry if he had lost too much blood. "Are you all right?" Yun Shishir squinted her eyes and asked. While she was worried, she also suspected that he was playing some tricks again. Could it be that he was luring her to let her guard down and wanted to do something again? The captain's lips twitched violently. He suddenly staggered and fell onto the rudder. Yun Shishir was startled. She went forward vigilantly and pushed his shoulder. However, his body tilted and he fell into his seat. There was no movement. "He's dead." Yun Shishir was frightened. She immediately reached out to hold the rudder, but she didn't know how to balance it. She didn't know how to control such a large cruise ship, so she immediately reached out to slap his face. "Wake up." When she touched his face just now, it was ice cold. He seemed to have lost too much blood and fainted from shock. Once a person lost too much blood and did not stop the bleeding for a long time, they would go into shock due to excessive blood loss, leading to brain death. We're humans, so fragile. She sighed in her heart. Yun Shishir was in disbelief. She held onto the rudder and looked at the dashboard nervously. However, she saw many lights blinking. She gritted her teeth and tried hard to recognize the signs. However, she couldn't understand some of the signs at all. She didn't know what they were for, so she didn't dare to touch them. Looking ahead, she couldn't tell if there was any danger in the seemingly calm sea. She also couldn't understand the radar map on the screen. Chapter 33:49. Yun Shishir was flustered, but she could only stabilize the rudder. She did not dare to act rashly. Beside her, the captain fell to the ground and did not move anymore. Generally speaking, a captain was not enough to control a cruise ship. In the cockpit, the cruise ship was not operated by the captain. Most of the time, it was the sailors who steered the ship. Just now, there was a slight malfunction in the cockpit. The lookout had noticed something unusual ahead, so the captain, first mate, and third mate came over to inspect and command. Xiao Yichen knew a little about maritime affairs. When he saw the captain in the cockpit, he knew that something special must have happened. Hence, the captain personally came to steer the ship. Therefore, he was spared to stay alive and control the cruise ship. The captain was fearless because he knew how important he was. Therefore, he was certain that Yun Shishir would not dare to attack him. Yun Shishir did not want to attack him at first, but she knew that if she did not do anything, she might be the one to die. However, the current crisis was that without a sailor at the helm, there were often many uncertainties. Under normal circumstances, without anyone steering the ship, the cruise ship would drift on its own without any accidents. However, this was under normal circumstances. However, the cruise ship had a fixed route at sea. Only by following the fixed route could they avoid many dangers. The sea was huge, so huge that it was unimaginable. 70% of the world was made up of the sea, and people's control of the sea was still very limited. There were many dangers at sea that were hard to predict. If they deviated from the route, it was a small matter. If they could not avoid the storm, the ship could capsize at any time. Now, she was the only one in the cockpit. Yun Shishir was overcautious. Just now, she had seen how the captain steered the ship. The controls were complicated, and there were many things on the dashboard. She could not tell what was what. The layout of the cruise ship was different from that of a car. She could not understand it just by looking at it. At this moment, an alarm suddenly sounded from the screen. The red light kept flashing. Yun Shishir walked over and looked at the screen. However, she saw a bunch of random codes on the screen. She was confused. She thought it was English, but after looking at it for a long time, she couldn't understand what the series of numbers on the screen meant. On the screen, there was only a vague route. After the red light flashed for a long time, Yun Shishir didn't dare to touch it. Not long after, a red-framed exclamation mark jumped up in the upper right corner. What happened? Yun Shishir was so anxious that she broke out in cold sweat. The alarm in the cockpit attracted the attention of the second mate who was in another cabin. He saw that the door was locked and became suspicious. He approached the door and looked inside. He was shocked. Inside the cockpit, several corpses were strewn all over the floor. Blood was everywhere. Yun Shishir heard the commotion at the door and turned to look at it. She saw a sailor-like man blocking the door. Startled, she took a step back and subconsciously tightened her grip on the pistol in her hand. Her eyes remained vigilant as she stared at the door from start to finish. Open the door. The man outside the door shouted for the door to be opened. Yun Shishir was not stupid enough to open the door for her. There's an anomaly ahead that has triggered the alarm. Let me in. Chapter 3350. She raised her gun and aimed it at him. When the sailor outside the door saw that she had a gun, he raised his hand instinctively and explained, I just came to check on the situation. I hope you know that if the ship is in danger, we will all die. I know. Yun Shishir gulped nervously. I'll let you in, but don't threaten me. Otherwise, I'll definitely kill you. The sailor nodded in fear. Yun Shishir aimed her gun at him as she reached out to open the door. However, she realized that the door was locked from the outside. When the second mate saw that the door was locked from the outside, he immediately reacted. He took out a bunch of keys from his pocket, found the key, and inserted it into the lock. From the beginning to the end, Yun Shishir aimed her gun at him vigilantly. The moment the door opened, the sailor pounced on her. Yun Shishir was caught off guard and fell to the ground. Just as she was about to shoot, the man punched the corner of her mouth. Bam! She was caught off guard. She arched her body in pain, but she hugged the gun tightly to prevent him from snatching it away. The sailor pulled out his knife from his waist and held the handle. Just as he raised his hand, suddenly, the ship suddenly let out an ear-piercing creak, and there was a strong turbulence. It was as if the entire ship was quaking and the mountains were shaking. Yun Shishir was shocked. She only felt that the entire ship was still shaking as if the world was turning upside down. What's going on? Yun Shishir's heart sank into great fear. The huge shaking caused the tip of the knife that the man was about to stab her chest to deviate and pierce the deck beside her. The tip of the knife stabbed into the deck ruthlessly. Coupled with the unstable center of gravity, it was difficult to pull it out. Yun Shishir reacted and took this opportunity to kick him away. Just as she held the gun tightly, but before she could aim, there was an even louder shaking. Boom! Through the deck, she seemed to hear an ear-piercing tearing sound coming from the bottom of the ship. Her heart turned cold. The sailor couldn't care less about her. He quickly got up and rushed to the screen, shouting that something was wrong. Shit! He cursed and threw himself into the rescue. Yun Shishir did not know what was going on. Just as she was confused, she heard an ear-piercing sound. The hull shook again. This time, the shaking was not as fierce as the previous 2 times. In an instant, the entire cockpit was plunged into darkness. The electrical system was damaged, and the entire cabin was plunged into darkness. Xiao Yi-chen and Yu were on their way here when they encountered such a strong turbulence. The cabin shook continuously, and Yu almost lost his balance. Xiao Yi-chen immediately reached out to support him. What's going on? Yu looked around nervously. Under the dreary moonlight, the waves crashed against the hull of the boat. Xiao Yi-chen walked to the railing and looked down. When he saw that the waves were abnormal, he frowned and said in shock, I'm afraid we've hit a reef. Hit a reef? Yes. Is it serious? Yu didn't understand these things and asked him curiously. He suddenly realized that he didn't know everything. He also realized that sometimes, he needed to rely on Xiao Yichen. Xiao Yichen nodded solemnly and said worriedly, from the looks of it, it must be very serious. A ship accidentally hitting a reef could be a serious matter. Chapter 3351. There were two types of rocks, soft rocks and hard rocks. When the former hit rocks, the seabed would be soft clay. When the latter hit rocks, they would hit sharp rocks with sharp edges. These rocks were usually as sharp as knives. When the ship hit the rocks, it would be like a knife cutting through the ship's hull. The waves were so rough, which meant that the rocks were very big. The ship was traveling at high speed, so it was very risky for it to hit rocks at such a fast speed. When Xiao Yichen saw that the ship had stopped, he knew that the bottom of the ship must have been cut. Once the ship's hull was cut open, the bottom of the ship would be torn apart by the rocks and water would enter the ship. If water entered the hull, it would cause the ship to capsize and sink to a certain extent. Xiao Yichen looked at Yu anxiously. I'm not sure how serious the situation is, but I'm sure that the ship hit rocks and the water entering the hull affected the electrical system. This means that the bottom of the ship has been cut open. We have to find Mommy as soon as possible and then find a lifeboat to take Mommy away from this ship. You mean this cruise ship could sink at any time? Not at any time. It can't sink immediately, but, Xiao Yichen said each word seriously and affectionately, we don't have much time left. Yu also became nervous. She nodded and ran toward the cockpit. Along the way, the ship kept shaking. The originally brightly lit banquet hall suddenly fell into darkness. The band members also stood up curiously. The music stopped abruptly, and the sudden silence made everyone even more nervous. The unexpected circuit failure caused everyone to fall into a panic. Help! Oh my God, what's going on? Did something happen? In the banquet hall, the guests were screaming nervously, and the scene was in a mess. The screams were hoarse, and there was a hubbub of voices. Accompanied by the sound of tableware falling and shattering, many people scrambled to run towards the door. At the most desperate moment, the selfishness of human nature was exposed. Many people rushed forward, but because it was dark, they couldn't see anything clearly. The banquet hall was completely enclosed, so there was no light and they couldn't see their own fingers. People followed their instincts and ran to the door like a flock of frightened headless flies. In the crowd, some women accidentally tripped over the things under their feet and fell to the ground. They wondered if it was because of the shaking of the ship that they lost their balance and fell, but no one was willing to help them. Instead, they stepped over them and ran to the door. At this critical juncture, their lives were on the line. If they could not even care about their own safety, who would care about the lives of others? Many weak women were trampled to death just like that. People broke through the banquet hall's door and rushed to the deck. The crowd surged onto the deck like a rising tide. Xiao Yichen and Yu happened to pass by the banquet hall. When they saw people running towards the deck, they immediately hugged Yu. Be careful. Yu was pulled into his arms. Then, they saw the black mass of people running out of the banquet hall. At this moment, the ship shook again and started to tilt slightly. The people who were running towards the deck suddenly lost their center of gravity and stumbled in the direction of the tilt. There was nothing to hold on to. Chapter 3352. Some of them were lucky. Even though they were nervous, they managed to grab onto the railing in time. Some of them panicked and didn't know how to react. They crashed into the railing and fell into the sea. Ah! Screams erupted from the crowd. Seeing people fall into the sea, they became even more nervous. Xiao Yichen held onto Yu's hand tightly and groped in a direction with fewer people. Yu was very calm, and so was Xiao Yichen. They knew very well that the most important thing was to stay calm. If they panicked, they wouldn't be able to do anything. The two little lads held hands tightly and weaved through the crowd. It was only when they left the area of the banquet hall that there were fewer and fewer people. Quite a number of sailors walked toward the cockpit. As they got closer to it, Yun Shishir's voice was suddenly heard from a corner. Yu Yu. Xiao Yi Chen. Yu Yu was the first to hear it. Xiao Yi Chen heard it as well. Both of them stopped in their tracks and looked towards the source of the voice. They saw Yun Shishir running towards them. She hugged them anxiously and looked them up and down. She saw that Yu Yu and Xiao Yi Chen had different degrees of injuries on their bodies. Yu Yu's face had some bruises. When she saw the bloodstains on Xiao Yi Chen's abdomen, she held her breath. Xiao Yi Chen, you're injured. Xiao Yi Chen comforted her. Mommy, don't worry. The blood isn't mine. He lied to her on purpose to comfort her. He didn't want her to worry, especially at a time like this. Yu Yu said strangely, Mommy, why are you here? Xiao Yi Chen said that you were in the cockpit. Xiao Yi Chen suddenly realized something and asked suspiciously, is the captain dead? Yun Shishir nodded guiltily. I stabbed him. I don't know if it's because I injured his arteries, but he lost a lot of blood and fainted. He's no longer showing any signs of life. I shouldn't have hit him so hard. Is he trying to kill you? Xiao Yi Chen's eyes flashed dangerously. Yes, if that's the case, Mommy, you don't have to blame yourself. He deserved to die. After pausing for a moment, Xiao Yi Chen continued, I suspect that the ship has hit a reef and there's a big hole in the bottom of the ship. Most likely, water has entered the ship and caused it to tilt. I'm worried that the boat will capsize soon. Capsize? She sucked in a breath of cold air. What should we do? Xiao Yi Chen said, let's find a lifeboat and leave this place. Mommy, don't be afraid. There's still time. We can make it. Where is the lifeboat? Under normal circumstances, it should be on the left and right sides of the Xian. I haven't seen it on my way here. I'll go to the stern to take a look immediately. All right. Yun Shishir nodded. Yu Yu suddenly grabbed Xiao Yi Chen. The latter turned around with a puzzled expression and asked, what's wrong? Dietriss's VIP cabin is in the middle. Yes, then, will he place the lifeboat at the stern, which is far away from the middle? Yu Yu narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Xiao Yi Chen heard this and seemed to have woken up from a dream. The lifeboat should be near the VIP cabin. Xiao Yi Chen grabbed Yun Shishir and Yu Yu's hands and said, let's go back. The three of them walked through the chaotic crowd. When they arrived near the VIP cabin, they saw Dietriss walking toward the right side of the ship, surrounded by his subordinates. Chapter 33:53. After they left, a few of his subordinates rushed over and untied him. As if he knew that the cruise ship had hit the rocks and was about to go silent, Dietrich hysterically ordered his subordinates to release the lifeboats. Yu Yu had hit his head with a vase, so even though he had regained consciousness, he looked groggy and not very clear-headed. Hearing footsteps on the deck, Dietrich turned his head and saw Xiao Yi Chen and Yu Yu. He was so frightened that he staggered and fell to the ground. When he saw Xiao Yi Chen, he seemed to be especially frightened. He kept retreating and pointed at Xiao Yi Chen with a trembling finger. He shouted at the top of his lungs, kill them. Don't leave them alive, kill them. Yu Yu was stunned. She knew that Dietrich had gone completely crazy. He probably knew that Xiao Yi Chen's abilities were extraordinary, so he wanted to kill them at all costs. However, Xiao Yi Chen was injured. His abdomen had been stabbed by Dietrich's hidden weapon. If he was unharmed, it would not be a problem for him to deal with these defeated soldiers. However, now that Xiao Yi Chen was injured, it would be dangerous if they focused on Xiao Yi Chen. Xiao Yichen was not afraid at all. He stepped forward and protected Yu Yu and Yun Shishir behind him. He said coldly, "If you dare to take a step forward, I swear that I will kill you." Even if he had to risk his life, he swore to protect Mommy and Yu Yu. Diedrich's subordinates were about to charge forward with their daggers drawn, but when they heard this, they hesitated. They did not have guns on them, but even if they did, they might not dare to charge forward recklessly. If they had guns, they would still have some confidence. However, if they were unarmed, they would not have any chance of winning if they fought barehanded. Some of these people had experienced Xiao Yichen's terrifying skills before. It was hard to imagine that such a small body of a child actually contained such powerful energy. Even though the one standing in front of them was only an 8-year-old child, his gaze was piercingly cold, and his entire body seemed to be bathed in blood. His small body seemed to emit an extremely powerful aura, overbearing and domineering. Such a terrifying and powerful aura was something that not even an adult warrior who had experienced hundreds of battles could possess. This kind of aura was definitely not because of his extraordinary skills, but because of his strong desire to protect. In his heart, there was someone he wanted to protect. Therefore, even if he seemed weak at times, he would emit a terrifying energy at any moment. "What are you waiting for?" Dietrich kicked him. "What are you waiting for? Charge! Are you afraid of a child?" I stabbed him in the abdomen. After a pause, Didorus gritted his teeth and said, "Focus on where he's injured and attack his vitals." His subordinates looked at each other before hesitantly pouncing on Mu Yichen. Xiao Yichen pushed Yu Yu away and said to him, "Protect Mommy." Yu Yu nodded and held Yun Shishir's hand as they dodged to the side. Yun Shishir was worried about Xiao Yichen. She was worried that he would be attacked by so many people and get injured. Yu Yu suddenly pulled her back and said to her, "Mommy, don't charge forward. Otherwise, you'll cause trouble. Then, we can't just watch." Chapter 33-54. I have an idea. Yu Yu paused for a moment before continuing, "But Mommy, you have to promise me that you'll stay here and not move." "What are you going to do?" "There's no time to explain. You'll know soon enough." Yu Yu turned and left after he finished speaking. Yun Shishir stood guard for a long time, trembling in fear. A few of Dietrich's subordinates rushed forward and surrounded Xiao Yichen. According to Dietrich's instructions, the few of them aimed at Xiao Yichen's injured area and attacked. Yun Shishir watched on in fear. Xiao Yichen knew how despicable these people were, so he took extra precautions. Yun Shishir originally wanted to rush forward, but when she thought of Yu Yu's words, she didn't dare to act recklessly. She was afraid that she wouldn't be of any help and would become a burden to Xiao Yichen and cause him more trouble. Knives and spears didn't hurt one's eyes, so she didn't dare to act recklessly. Yun Shishir hid in a corner. From the corner of her eye, she suddenly saw Dietrich walking to the back of the boat with his walking stick and activating something. It seemed like he wanted to raise and lower the lifeboat. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he was worried that Dietrich would take advantage of the chaos to escape on the lifeboat. He broke the wrist of one of his subordinates with a kick and threw a machete in front of Yun Shishir. "Mommy, don't let him escape." "Okay." Yun Shishir nodded heavily and rushed over to grab the machete tightly in her hand. She held the machete tightly and avoided the center of the fight. She ran behind Dietrich and viciously slashed the machete at him. Dietrich's reaction was still considered agile. When he heard the movement behind him, he quickly turned around and dodged her attack in time. However, because he dodged too pathetically, he fell to the ground and the half-lowered lifeboat was suspended. Yun Shishir gripped the hilt of her sword nervously. Before she could attack again, Didorus kicked her knee. She heard a crack, which seemed to be the sound of a dislocated joint. She groaned in pain and fell to one knee, caught off guard. Seeing Dimitri's lunging at her to dodge the knife in her hand, she subconsciously raised her hand and threw the knife into the sea. Rather than let him snatch it, he might as well throw it away. She was not good at using a knife. Therefore, if she kept it in her hand, she might accidentally hurt herself. However, what Dietrich did not know was that Yun was filming Extreme Youth, and there were a few fighting scenes that the crew had specially hired professional instructors to train her. Just as he was about to pounce on her like a wolf, she nimbly dodged and reached out to grab his arm. Following the inertia, she bent his arm backward. Only a crack sound could be heard. It was the clear sound of bones breaking. Dietrich's voice was already hoarse from screaming. Due to the excruciating pain of the dislocated bone, he was drenched in cold sweat, but he could not make a sound. His eyes were ferocious as he looked back. Yun's fist was aimed at his eyes. She was wearing a ring on her finger. This was a priceless jewel that was prepared for her to be auctioned off. The 1-carat diamond ring, which was extremely hard, pierced his eyes. Dietrich was in so much pain that his whole body convulsed. He broke free from her and covered his eyes as he rolled around on the ground. She struggled to stand up and nimbly tore off a large section of her skirt. Taking advantage of the fact that he could not retaliate, she tied his hands tightly behind his back. Chapter 33:55. When Yun stood up and turned her head, she saw that Xiao Yi-chen was gradually losing his strength. The exhaustion on his face showed that he had overexerted himself. Yi-chen. In her anxiety, she was about to rush over when she suddenly heard rumbling footsteps from across the deck. It sounded as if a large group of people were running toward them. Everyone nervously stopped what they were doing and looked in the direction of the sound. They saw Yu running to the front with a large group of people behind him. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Mommy, release the lifeboat. Quick!" When Xiao Yi-chen heard this, he quickly rushed over to save the lifeboat. Yun finally understood what Yu was doing. He must have been worried that Xiao Yi-chen would not be able to outlast these people. Hence, he ran to the banquet hall and told the bewildered guests that they could leave on the lifeboat. These people were eager to win, so they followed Yu. The rumbling of the crowd caused the entire deck to shake. The more chaotic the situation was, the more chaotic it was. In addition, no one stood out to give orders. Everyone was selfishly trying to survive and hoped that they would be safe. Hence, they did not care that their private actions would cause more and more chaos. Yun was also desperately looking for a mechanism. However, no matter how fast she could not stop these crazy people. They quickly rushed over. In an instant, the sea of people was like a violent wave that destroyed Yu and Xiao Yi-chen. Yun gritted her teeth and rushed into the crowd. When she saw Xiao Yi-chen being pushed to the ground, she was worried that he would be injured. Without thinking, she pounced on him and used her body to shield him from the crowd. When Yu saw Yun protecting Xiao Yi-chen, he pounced on her with heartache. He hugged Yun back tightly and shielded her. Even though the crowd was surging, he did not let go. Creak. Due to the excessive number of people surging towards the bow of the ship, most of the weight was placed on the bow of the ship. In an instant, the cruise ship tilted too much in a certain direction, causing the middle of the ship to show signs of cracking. Along with the tilt, many people were caught off guard and fell into the sea. Some of their heads fiercely hit the poles and fell into the sea, creating a pool of blood. Yun hugged Mu Yi-chen tightly while Yu hugged her. The three of them curled up in a corner and relied solely on Yun strength. She held onto the railing tightly and barely stabilized her center of gravity. At this moment, the sound of propellers suddenly came from the sky. The dark night sky was suddenly illuminated by the light from the helicopter. In an instant, it was as bright as day. Everyone looked up at the sky. The cabin door of the helicopter opened, and a ladder was thrown down from the cabin door. Several fully armed mercenaries jumped along the ladder and landed steadily on the deck, raising their submachine guns. Sparks flashed at the muzzle of the gun. In the blink of an eye, they killed their way out. Yun Shishir did not know where these mercenaries came from. Seeing that they killed people without hesitation, she thought that they were Dietrich's subordinates. She immediately hugged Xiao Yichen tightly in her arms, fear in her eyes. When Yu Yu saw the logo on their uniforms, a calm smile suddenly appeared on his face. He suddenly stood up and was about to walk towards them. Yun Shishir pulled him back nervously. You, what are you doing? Mommy, don't be afraid. Yu Yu smiled and comforted her gently. It's okay. They are all my subordinates. What? Chapter 3356. Yun Shishir was stunned. She looked at the row of valiant soldiers behind Yu Yu and her mind went blank. Subordinates. Yu Yu turned around to face them. The smile on his face faded as he said coldly, "Why are you only here now?" The three soldiers immediately knelt on one knee. Their tall and strong bodies were much taller than Yu Yu. However, such strong mercenaries were actually kneeling in front of a child. The leader said in a low voice, "Sorry, sir. We were a step too late." Their appearance greatly controlled the order of the scene. When the crowd saw them, they did not dare to act recklessly. They quickly retreated, afraid that they would infuriate them and become cold corpses like the people they had killed. The helicopter slowly descended. The crowd moved aside, and the huge helicopter landed steadily on the deck. The propellers slowly stopped. Muyaja suddenly appeared at the cabin door. He jumped down and his gaze fell on her. When he saw her hand, he frowned and quickly walked over. When Yun Shishir saw him, she suppressed all her grievances and forced a smile. He walked in front of her and half knelt on the ground. He held her shoulders tightly and looked at her from head to toe. She was worried that he would mistakenly think that she was seriously injured, so she quickly clarified, "This is not my blood." Muyaja clearly did not believe her. Only after he did a cursory check and confirmed that the blood was not hers did he relax slightly. In Yun Shishir's arms, Xiao Yichen's body was slightly curled up. Due to his vigorous movements, the wound on his abdomen opened up again and blood stained her body. Xiao Yichen was obviously seriously injured. Hence, his eyelids were heavy. When he vaguely heard Muyaja's voice, he was relieved. However, he soon fainted. Yu Yu quickly said, "Daddy, we can't stay here for long. The cruise ship has hit a reef and the hull is damaged. It will sink soon." Muyaja frowned. Yu Yu continued, "Xiao Yichen's abdomen is injured. Daddy, he has lost a lot of blood and needs immediate surgery." Understood. Muyaja took Xiao Yichen from Yun Shishir's arms. He stood up and walked towards the cabin door. When he turned around, he saw that Yu Yu did not follow him. Muyaja turned around and said in confusion, "Yu Yu, get on the helicopter as soon as possible." "Daddy, how many mercenaries did you bring?" "3. This helicopter can carry 5 people. Pilot, you, Xiao Yichen, and Mommy." "Mommy, I will send a mercenary to protect you." "Let the mercenary stay." Muyaja said, "You get on the helicopter." "No." Yu Yu glanced at Dietrich, who was unconscious on the deck. His gaze turned cold. "I don't care about the others, but I have to take this old man with me. I still have a score to settle with him." He was worried. Dietrich was cunning and he had to keep an eye on him. The crew was evacuated separately to ensure their safety. Muyaja naturally did not agree. How could he leave him alone? No. Chapter 3357. Muyaja finally agreed. Yu Yu smiled, walked forward, and stuffed a purple crystal into Xiao Yichen's clenched fist. In the rush of the crowd, many of the purple crystals had been squeezed out and rolled around. However, he held them tightly. There were still 2 left. These were gifts from Xiao Yichen. Now, he gave them to him as a possession talisman. Yu Yu was really worried about Xiao Yichen. Therefore, he hoped that Mu Yazhou would take Xiao Yichen away as soon as possible for treatment. Yun Shishir said, Yu Yu, I'll stay with you. Mommy. Be good and listen to me. I'll be fine. You'll only make things worse if you stay. After all, it's more troublesome to protect two people than one. As he spoke, he took a few steps back and waved his hand. Mu Yazhou hugged Yun Shishir's shoulders and brought her onto the helicopter. When the people on the deck saw this, they mustered their courage and walked toward the helicopter with hope of survival. A few mercenaries stepped forward and stood in front of Yu Yu to protect him. They raised their submachine guns and fired at the deck. Everyone retreated a few steps in fright and could only watch helplessly as the helicopter slowly ascended and left. Yu Yu sighed and turned around to look for something on the floor. When the mercenaries behind him saw this, they walked forward and asked curiously, Sir, what are you looking for? I'll look for it for you. No need. You won't find it. I don't even know what I'm looking for. I'll look for it myself. As Yu Yu spoke, he lay on the floor and carefully looked for it. What he said just now was just an excuse. He stayed because he wanted to find the remaining purple crystals as soon as possible. He turned around and searched the deck. Finally, he found a few purple crystals scattered on the floor. He held them tightly in his palm as if they were his most precious treasure. Great! I've finally found them. When he got home, he would string them together into a bracelet. He had to make it stronger and protect it carefully. He could not lose it so easily again. In the distance, another helicopter flew over and landed on the deck. The people on the deck were hopeful, but they did not dare to go forward. They were afraid of the two mercenaries beside Yu Yu. They were well built and looked well trained. Moreover, they had guns in their hands. Bullets did not have eyes. Otherwise, they would have gone forward and boarded the rescue helicopter. Another mercenary walked down from the helicopter. Yu Yu ordered him to bring Dyrus onto the helicopter. He planned to bring him back to Hurricane's headquarters to settle the score, and Yu 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 Yu. Yu 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 Yu. Yu Yu Yu, Yu, and Yu Yu Yu. Only a handful of the people here, Yu Yu Yu. Yu, Yu, Yu Yu Yu. Yu 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 Yu. Yu oh Yu Yu. She's only 3 years old. Hearing this, Yu Yu could not help but feel a little sympathetic for her. The girl in his arms did not know what was going on. She looked at him innocently with her big, watery eyes and sucked on her fingers. Yu Yu looked at her and his heart softened. In reality, he did not plan to save anyone on the ship. Most of the people who entered and exited this cruise ship were rich and ruthless nobles. They took human lives for fun just because they had a lot of money. Chapter 33:58. Some of them had lost their conscience, and such people were not worth saving. However, Yu Yu thought of his mother when he saw the innocent child. If it was his mother, she would sacrifice herself to protect him. His heart softened when he thought of this. The woman continued to plead, "Please. The child is innocent." Yu Yu was silent for a long time as if he was thinking. Finally, he said calmly, "Bring the girl onto the plane." The woman's eyes lit up and she immediately handed the little girl over to them, thanking them profusely. Yu Yu boarded the plane and the mercenaries escorted Dietrich into the cabin. Only then did they realize that Dietrich had left a suitcase beside him. This old man did not forget to bring money with him even when he was running for his life. The plane started slowly and the propellers stirred up waves as it slowly rose into the air. When they were in the air and looking down at the cruise ship, Yu Yu realized that the huge cruise ship had broken apart from the middle. Just as Xiao Yichen had said, the cruise ship had hit a reef. It was probably a very hard reef that had split open the ship's belly. The bottom of the ship must have been split open. Endless seawater poured into the crack and into the cabin. The bottom 2 floors had probably been submerged by the seawater. The hull of the ship was very long and its buoyancy was affected, causing it to sink continuously. The middle of the ship had also started to break apart due to the imbalance of gravity. Yu Yu sat on the cruise ship with lingering fear. He did not dare to imagine that if his uncle's men had not arrived in time, the cruise ship would have sunk to the bottom of the sea. However, this was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was the desperate crowd on the ship. In the face of death, the most selfish instincts of human nature were revealed. Perhaps they would not be able to wait until the cruise ship sank and would be trampled to death by the crazy crowd. Yu Yu heaved a sigh of relief. However, before he could completely relax, he heard a man's sinister laughter behind him. Ha ha ha. Yu Yu was shocked. He turned around and looked at Beatrice. He did not know when he had woken up. This cunning man. If he was not sure that he was tied up tightly, he would have been nervous. However, he was clearly the one in the most passive position right now, so how could he still laugh? Yu Yu asked coldly, "What are you laughing at?" Dietrich smiled, revealing a mouthful of sinister teeth. "I'm laughing at your naivety." "What, do you really think you're safe now?" "Naive? Who was the naive one?" Yu Yu snorted coldly without any expression on her face. She did not want to talk to him anymore. But Beatrice continued to ask, "Why didn't you leave me on the cruise ship? I don't think you're so kind-hearted as to really want to save me. Don't tell me you don't want me to die." Yu Yu said, "I'm keeping you alive because we still have a score to settle between us." "Settle the score?" "Oh," Beatrice replied curiously. "What do you want to settle with me?" "Mommy's debt, Xiao Chen's debt, and the debt between you and me. All of this should be accounted for. It just so happens that I also have a score that I want to settle with you. However, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to do so." "What do you mean?" Before Yu Yu could finish speaking, he saw Beatrice's mouth move. He widened his eyes in confusion and saw that Beatrice was grinning slightly. Between his lips, there was something black. Chapter 33:59. It looked like a piece of plastic, but it wasn't as simple as plastic. He seemed to have been holding it in his mouth for a long time, embedded between his teeth. Yu Yu took a closer look and saw that it was a mini mechanism. He instinctively raised his hand to protect his eyes. However, this thing didn't seem to be the hidden weapon he had imagined. Beatrice bit the thing and exerted some force. Then, he heard a long beep sound. Beep, 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 electronic sound came from his body. "What's that sound?" Yu Yu ordered, "Go and take a look. Something on his body is making a sound." "Yes." The mercenary walked forward. Beatrice stared at him like a tiger watching its prey, but his lips were curled into a smug and cold-blooded smile, as if he was determined to get his hands on him. "Behave yourself." The man punched him, and the thing in his mouth fell to the ground due to the huge inertia. He picked it up and looked at it. His eyes were shocked. He kicked Dietrich to the ground and lifted his clothes. Sure enough, he saw a small mini-box on his waist. He opened the box and saw that it was a mini-time bomb. The bomb had already started its countdown. 60 seconds were running out. Yu Yu also saw the bomb on his body. He stood up and walked to Beatrice's side, his eyes wide open in shock. "You!" "Ha ha ha." Beatrice laughed crazily. He knew that he was going to die. Even if Yu Yu spared his life, he would make him wish he was dead. He had already expected this. Hence, the bomb on his body was his last resort. Beatrice's lips split open and he laughed arrogantly. "Ha ha ha. Since I'm going to die sooner or later, rather than die in your hands, why don't you accompany me to hell? How about it?" Yu Yu was so angry that he gritted his teeth. The mercenary squatted down to study the bomb, but Dytrus was calm. He said coldly, "I advise you not to move. Once this bomb is activated, it's only a matter of time before it explodes. Don't waste your time. Die with me. In your dreams." Yu Yu immediately said, "Open the hatch and throw him into the sea." The mercenary nodded, squatted down, and nimbly removed the chains on his body. When they boarded the plane, in order to stabilize him, Yu Yu had ordered people to tie him to the rack. Now, the chains were heavy, and it would take some effort to untie him. Dytrus laughed even more proudly. "You're too smart for your own good. When you've undone it, throw me into the sea. You won't be able to escape death." "Shut up. Don't underestimate this bomb. It's so small, but I don't mind letting you see its power." Yu Yu gritted his teeth and grabbed his collar, glaring at him. "Don't you dare." 30 seconds left. The bomb was about to explode. It's too late. He made a prompt decision. He knew that if they wasted time on unlocking the chains, they would really be buried with Dietrich. The mercenary opened the hatch and looked at the sea. He turned around and exchanged glances with Yu Yu. He nimbly put an oxygen mask on Yu Yu's face and hugged him in his arms. Yu Yu immediately understood what he was going to do. "Are you crazy?" "Sir, I'm very conscious." Chapter 3360. You have to understand that if you jump from such a high plane, it's no different from falling from a 10-story building. Trust me. The mercenary carried him to the cabin door and hugged the child tightly. The other two mercenaries also approached. The pilot initiated the emergency landing procedure and walked to the cabin door as well. Muyaja walked to the back of the ship and looked into the distance. In mid-air, the helicopter was slowly approaching. It could be seen with the naked eye and would land in a few minutes. Yun Shishir and Xiao Yichen had already been sent to the ship's medical team. Muyaja was only concerned about Yu Yu, so he walked to the helipad to wait for him. Gong Jia was looking into the distance with a pair of binoculars when he suddenly noticed something. His eyes widened and he was extremely shocked. "What's going on?" Muyaja, who had originally calmed down, immediately became nervous. He snatched the binoculars from Gong Jia's hands and saw the cabin door open. A few mercenaries stood at the cabin door in an orderly manner. The biting cold wind blew, and one of them was holding a child tightly. He recognized at a glance that the child in the man's arms was Yu Yu. However, the strange thing was that they were planning to jump off the plane. Muyaja almost didn't have time to think. The next second, he saw 4 people jump out of the cabin door one after another. Their bodies were like feathers, lightly floating toward the sea. What's going on? Gong Jia also saw this scene. He rushed to the railing nervously and held the handrail nervously. However, there was a loud boom. Then, the helicopter exploded in an instant. It was as if a curtain of fire had exploded in the night sky. Even though they were far away, they seemed to be able to feel the air waves caused by the explosion. It was almost spreading toward them. The deck also shook, and the explosion caused strong waves on the sea. The ship was slightly jolted. Gong Jia was frightened, and his breathing suddenly stopped. Muyaja clenched his fists, but his gaze was fixed on the figure that kept falling toward the sea. His heart suddenly stopped beating. It seemed that the explosion had occurred in the cabin. The entire fuselage shook, and the propeller was broken and scattered. At that moment, it was as if the end of the world had arrived. The entire world was gray and the turbulence was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. The tragic fire and a cloud of fire instantly disintegrated the helicopter into ruins, and the black wreckage kept falling toward the sea. Muyaja's eyes suddenly turned red. Yu Yu. Gong Jia was so shocked that his throat seemed to be blocked, and he could not make a sound. No, no. Yu was hugged tightly to the man's chest. His large palm protected the back of the boy's head as he buried his face in his chest. His large body formed a bundle that wrapped the boy in his embrace. He only felt that the two of them were in a straight parabola, like a sharp needle, piercing through the air and piercing into the calm sea. The burning wreckage kept falling, and among them, there was a broken propeller that smashed onto the man's back. There was a loud sound, and he seemed to have heard the sound of his back breaking. He was so nervous that he closed his eyes and fell into endless despair. Crash. Chapter 3361. Even though Yu was being held tightly in someone's arms and the impact was reduced significantly, falling from a height of more than 20 meters and hitting the surface of the sea was undoubtedly the same impact as falling from a tall building. He held onto his breathing mask tightly and greedily sucked in the meager amount of oxygen. The mercenary who was holding onto him suffered a huge blow to the head. He suffered from intracranial hemorrhage and died on the spot. Even though he was already dead, he was still holding onto him tightly. Unfortunately, it was this kind of protection. Yu was locked tightly in his arms. As his body fell, he kept falling into the abyss. He was getting further and further away from the surface of the sea. He kept reaching out, but it was all in vain. Mommy, Yu struggled to open his mouth and a string of vague syllables escaped. Daddy, brother, he kept struggling. His survival instinct made him want to live. More importantly, it was because he was worried about the person in his heart. Yao, the helicopter disintegrated in the air. The burning wreckage fell into the sea and floated on the surface of the sea. The sky was filled with smoke. At 5:00 in the morning, the sky was turning bright. The horizon stretched as far as the eye could see. Two huge armed ships surrounded the area where Yu fell. The aircraft carrier was parked in the center. It lowered its speedboats and started to salvage the area. More than 10 speedboats rushed on the sea, cleaning up the floating oil on the surface of the sea at the fastest speed. A whole hour had passed. So many people had been sent out. So far, they had only salvaged the wreckage of the helicopter and an undamaged suitcase. The $500 million in the suitcase was still intact. Xiao Yichen was still unconscious. Yun Shishir was unconscious for a short while. When she woke up, her heart stopped beating when she heard the bad news. Yu had fallen into the sea. There was no news of him until now. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Yun Shishir could not take such a huge blow. She could not believe it. However, when she rushed out of the cabin and saw the scene in front of her with her own eyes, she finally believed that Yu had really fallen into the sea and disappeared. The reason for the fall was the explosion of the helicopter. However, the exact cause of the explosion was still unknown. Falling from a height of more than 20 meters into the sea, his life or death was unknown. Mu Yaja was still worried. He put on a diving suit and personally went to the sea to search for Yu. Gong Jia calmly commanded while comforting the terrified Yun Shishir. Yun Shishir guarded the cabin and did not go anywhere. She was full of hope that the people in charge of the salvage would bring back good news. However, other than some wreckage, some parts, and a few floating corpses, there was no breakthrough. The deepest part of the sea was thousands of meters deep. So far, the people that were sent out were mainly searching within 300 meters of the sea surface. 300 meters was the maximum range that could be searched. The deeper parts of the sea were places that humans could not go. It was too dangerous and required the use of instruments. The ship was equipped with such instruments and had been thrown into the sea. However, the images that were sent back did not show any clues. They were already narrowing down the scope of the salvage operation. It would take a lot of effort just to salvage the wreckage. Not to mention an 8-year-old child. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Sir. A diver came back to report that they had found a corpse. Yun Shishir stood up agitatedly, and her brother immediately asked her what kind of corpse it was. Chapter 3362. The diver said, the body was chained up, and his body was badly mutilated. However, after identification, we can confirm that he's from Diatrisborn. After a brief examination, we found that he had explosives tied to his body, so we can confirm the cause of the accident. Explosives? Yes. A suicide bomber. Gong Jia gritted his teeth in hatred. This sly old fox, even in death, he wanted to take someone down with him. Before the oxygen in the oxygen tank ran out, Mu Yaja returned to the shore. He took off his diving goggles, looked back at the sea, and bit his lip hard. He had been searching for 2 hours without stopping. In the cold sea, he had almost exhausted all his energy. He ate some compressed biscuits to replenish his energy, changed his oxygen tank, and prepared to go back into the water. Gong Jia stopped him. Are you crazy? Unlike on land, the energy consumption in the sea is several times higher. Don't push yourself too hard. Mu Yaja turned around and looked at him. We don't know whether Yu is dead or alive. Do you want me to stay on the shore and do nothing? I can't do that. At least, you should rest for a while. Gong Jia said again, if you consume too much energy, it'll be dangerous. I know what to do. Gong Jia wanted to say something, but Mu Yaja turned around and left quickly. Now, every minute and second was incomparably precious to him. The salvage operation lasted for 5 hours, but there was no news. The golden rescue period was slowly approaching, and the hope of survival was getting slimmer and slimmer. They found a few more bodies, but other than the bodies of the 3 mercenaries, there was still no news of the pilot and Yu. For a moment, they felt that something was amiss. In such a short period of time, it was impossible for a person to fall too deep, let alone be washed too far away by the waves. Gong Jia had sealed off the sea area as soon as possible. Basically, Yu would only be in this area, so how could they not catch him? In the regenerated sea area, a person would not sink because the sea was buoyant. 300 meters was already very deep, and a person could not sink to a few thousand meters in such a short period of time. That would be inconceivable. Where could they have gone? Gong Jia was both anxious and worried. This sudden turn of events had caught him off guard. Yun Shishir was already on the verge of collapse. She stood guard on the boat. Even though she was exhausted, she didn't dare to close her eyes. He was worried that once he opened his eyes, the whole world would be turned upside down. The more time passed and the more there was no news, the more she blamed herself. If it wasn't for her, Yu wouldn't be in such a dangerous situation. She was such a failure. What kind of danger did he encounter that he needed his 2 sons to save him? She also found out about Yu's other identity. She did not expect Yu to be related to the Hurricane Group. She also did not know that Yu was one of the core members of the Hurricane Group. She originally thought that Yu had a toy company that was currently being managed by Li Hanlin. She did not expect that he had an even deeper identity. She did not know much and did not have the heart to care, but she knew that the culprit who kidnapped her this time, Daitris, was after Yu. Daitris and the Hurricane Group had a deep grudge. Hence, even if he died, he swore to drag Yu down to hell with him. If she had known, but there was no such thing. She had been kept in the dark from the beginning. Chapter 3363. Yun Shishir was almost suffocating from the pain. If anything happened to Yu, she would never forgive herself. Too much time had passed, and all the people who went into the sea were exhausted. Gong Xiaojia naturally could not withdraw the team. If they could not salvage it in 5 hours, then they would spend 10 or even 20 hours. He did not believe that there would be no news at all. However, for now, no news was the best news. Hurricane headquarters. The medical center was on standby. The phone suddenly rang. Gong Xiaoying received the call, and his expression became serious. He led the team to the helipad. In the distance, a helicopter flew over slowly, circled once, and slowly landed on the helipad. The wind was a little strong. Gong Xiaoying narrowed his eyes slightly. Looking at the helicopter that landed steadily on the helipad, his gaze became scorching hot. The cabin door opened, and a pilot in a sorry state jumped out. He was holding a child wrapped in a blanket in his arms, and hurried to Gong Xiaoying. Gong Xiaoying asked in a low voice, "Is he okay?" The pilot took a deep breath, shook his head, and answered in a serious tone, "Boss, fortunately, he's fine. He's just hit the back of his head, and he's unconscious." Gong Xiaoying raised his hand and untied the blanket, revealing the child's delicate but pale face. The child's eyes were tightly shut. His long eyelashes were wet from the seawater, and his slightly greenish eyelids were probably frozen by the seawater. His skin was extremely cold, and there was no warmth. The seawater was cold, and after being soaked in it for a long time, his originally fair face was even paler than before. Because he was wearing an oxygen mask, there were dark red marks from his nose to his mouth. The oxygen mask had been removed. The child was still unconscious. Gong Xiaoying's expression changed slightly. He scrutinized the child's face carefully, and he was a little moved. Similar. Very similar. Those eyebrows, those eyes, that perky nose, they were somewhat similar to Mu Qingqing's. They were similar in appearance and spirit. This child was very much like his grandmother. Especially those eyes, they reminded him of her at first glance. However, due to his injuries, he looked extremely weak. Gong Xiaoying was well aware of the child's identity. Other than being his grandson, he was also one of the core people in charge of Project Heaven's Eye. For the past few years, he had been kept in the dark and didn't know anything. However, when Yu returned to the island with Gong Jia, someone leaked the news. When he returned to the headquarters, he heard some rumors. Following the clues, he quickly found out the child's identity. It turned out that his daughter had given birth to such a genius grandson. He had never believed that the person who came up with the Sky Eye plan was really an 8-year-old child. What was even more unbelievable was that this child was his grandson. At such a young age, he had already surpassed his master. He was proud of this, but he also felt that it was a pity that he had only just found out that Yu was his grandson. He couldn't help but sigh. How is he? Gong Xiaoying's heart ached. He immediately ordered, "Hurry up and send him to the medical center." At the medical center, the operating theater, Alice received the notice and rushed over. However, she was slightly stunned when she saw the child lying on the operating table. This child was not Gong Jia's. Back then, Gong Jia had threatened and bribed her to keep this secret from Gong Xiaoying. Chapter 3364. Gong Xiaoying was standing in front of the operating table. When he saw her, he called her over. "Alice." "Yes. This is my grandson. I'll hand him over to you. You must cure him." Alice was stunned for a long time until Gong Xiaoying's cold gaze landed on her. She hurriedly nodded and said, "Understood." She did not dare to disobey Gong Xiaoying's orders. Before she came, her subordinates had already done a series of precise examinations on the child. Other than some external injuries, a moderate concussion, and slight intracranial damage, the child's various functions could be said to be very poor. How poor? If these conditions were not improved, he would not live past 20 years. This was not an exaggeration. The medical elites gathered at the Hurricane Group's headquarters were definitely the best in the world. Basically, this was a conservative estimate. 20 years was still a relatively optimistic situation. The various functions of his organs were not optimistic, especially his organs. Yu Yu's heart was naturally fragile and weak. Moreover, his physique was not satisfactory. Compared to Xiao Yichen's physique, Yu Yu's physique had always been poorer since he was born. After years of careful treatment, although there were some improvements year by year, it could be said to be minimal. Alice took the report and flipped through a few pages. Her expression was grave. There's a big problem with his heart. What problem? Congenital heart failure. When Gong Xiaoying heard this, his heart suddenly sank. According to Gong Jia, Alice said carefully, this child was born prematurely. He was not even a month old. His older brother's physique is very strong. It's probably because he was deprived of nutrients in his mother's womb that he developed poorly. Gong Xiaoying's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. You already knew about this child's existence. Alice's heart skipped a beat and she did not speak for a moment. Gong Xiaoying's tone became more dangerous. You hid it from me together with him. Alice lowered her head guiltily. Her voice trembled slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide it from you. Forget it. Gong Xiaoying waved his hand expressionlessly and said coldly, I know. This was all his idea. Alice remained silent. You said that he has a heart problem. Then, is there a corresponding treatment plan? Alice looked up and hesitated for a long time before she slowly said, It's not that I don't have one. It's just that I need some time. Gong Xiaoying frowned. How long is a little time? 5 years. Alice continued, because I don't know what level it is, I can't say for the time being. However, it's not like there are no conditions that can be improved. Do you need a heart transplant? No need. Alice said bluntly, even if it's a heart transplant, no matter how good the medical skills are, after the transplant surgery, they can't live more than 10 years. This is already the highest record in the medical field. Oh. Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at her. He said slowly, I'll leave this child to you. You must do your best for me. Yes. However, there's another thing that you have to remember. This child is now with me. You're not allowed to tell anyone about this. After a pause, Gong Xiaoying said meaningfully, including Gong Jia. Chapter 3365. But, if this child regains consciousness and wants to return to his mother's side, with his intelligence, no one can stop him from leaving this place. Alice said so. Gong Xiaoying smiled coldly when he heard this. He turned around and slowly sized her up. Alice, you should know what this child means to me. Alice nodded and said with a smile, this child is your grandson and your closest relative. He's very important to you. More importantly, this child is talented and is also the core figure of the Heavenly Eye project. However, with Gong Xiaoying's stubborn personality, he could not accept Mu Yaja. After so many years, Gong Xiaoying's hatred for the Mu family had not disappeared at all. It was deep in his bones. This was not something that could be easily resolved with just a few words. However, Yu Yu had also made his position clear. He was on Mu Yaja's side. If Gong Xiaoying could not accept Mu Yaja, he would definitely not acknowledge Gong Xiaoying as his grandfather. This made Gong Xiaoying very sad. More than 10 years ago, the Mu family had taken away his love. Now, Mu Yaja had his daughter and grandson. He had also mentioned to Gong Jia that even if Yun Shishir left Mu Yaja, she would not be left with nothing. So far, the Hurricane Group had already dominated half of the arms industry. The Gong family was a big family. He did not care about Mu Yaja and the Xingyu Financial Group at all. However, father and son were connected. Yu Yu's dependence on Mu Yaja was not just a father-son relationship. He acknowledged that this man was enough to be his mother's support for the rest of her life. Therefore, he acknowledged him and defended him very much. However, Gong Xiaoying did not like him very much. Gong Xiaoying sneered and said, "Since you know, then you should know what to do." Alice was at a loss for words. Gong Xiaoying walked up to her slowly and said meaningfully, "I heard that you used to be a hypnotist and an authority in the field of hypnotism." Alice's gaze shook as she looked at him in disbelief. Gong Xiaoying said faintly, "I remember that you once used deep hypnosis to permanently seal part of the memories of an experimental subject." "Yes," Alice nodded solemnly. "If we use deep hypnosis, we can indeed achieve the method of sealing memories. But do we really have to do this?" Her questioning made Gong Xiaoying faintly unhappy. "Alice, don't forget your position. Yu is my grandson and my flesh and blood. I won't harm him." Gong Xiaoying turned around and looked at the child lying on the operating table. He was so quiet that he looked like he was sleeping. His eyes were filled with unconcealable love. "I didn't want to do this unless I had no other choice." He suddenly turned around and gritted his teeth as he said, "I didn't want to do this either. But, what can I do? I can't just watch this child return to that man's side. He already has enough. I definitely won't allow him to take you away." Alice could not help but want to refute. Yu was Mu Yaja's flesh and blood and was his beloved son. Doing this would be equally cruel to Yu and Mu Yaja. However, she did not have the courage to speak. After thinking for a long time, she finally nodded and said weakly, "I know what to do." Okay. Chapter 3366. Gong Xiaoying said, "I hope you don't disappoint me." After saying that, he turned around and walked away. Alice walked to the operating table and lowered her head to look at Yu's young and delicate face. She hesitated for a moment before raising her hand to gently caress his face. Her red lips trembled slightly as she suddenly closed her eyes in desolation. "I'm sorry." In the quiet room, no light could pass through. It was dark. Smack! A lonely light came on. Alice carried Yu to the sofa and adjusted his sitting position. In his half-awake state, Yu opened his eyes slightly. His consciousness was in a state of chaos, and he could not tell if he was in reality or in a dream. She walked to the phonograph, put in a disc, and played it softly. Soothing music sounded melodiously. Alice gently bent over in front of him and raised her hand. A pocket watch fell and swayed gently. Yu opened his hazy eyes. As the pocket watch swayed gently, his eyes gradually lost focus and became empty and dark. He suddenly felt a ray of sunlight above his head gradually sprinkling on his body, and his whole body was enveloped in warmth. Immediately after, he opened his eyes and saw an endless sea. Under the sunlight, the golden beach was beautiful and dazzling. He walked on the beach and looked around, but there was no one in sight. Suddenly, he had a splitting headache. A woman's gentle voice sounded. "Who are you?" Yu turned around warily, but there was no one in sight. "Who's talking?" The woman asked, "What's your name?" Yu answered without hesitation, "Yun Tianyu." The woman asked, "What did you see?" Yu rubbed his eyes and turned around, only to see Mu Yaja standing behind him and smiling at him. The expression on his face suddenly became lively. "Daddy!" He leaped forward in joy, but when he reached him and opened his arms, he caught nothing but air. He was stunned. When he looked again, the person in front of him seemed to have disappeared into thin air. "Daddy? He's not your daddy." "What?" Yu turned pale with fright. Without waiting for him to question, the woman asked step by step, "Who do you want to see the most?" "Who's talking?" Yu asked blankly. He took a few steps back in shock and bumped into a soft body. He turned around in fright, only to see Yun Shusher standing behind him and smiling gently at him. "Yu, come here." "Mommy." Yu walked toward her in a panic. He was so scared that he was about to cry. Mommy, he reached out to grab Yun's hand, but in the blink of an eye, she was gone again. Mommy! He shouted hoarsely. Mommy! Yu. Yu heard someone calling his name again. He turned around and saw Xiao Yichen hugging Yueyao and playing on the beach. The two little lads were diligently building a fortress and having a lot of fun. Xiao Yichen called out to him. Yu, come over and play with us. Yu did not dare to go over. He was afraid that the two people in front of him would disappear again. Don't, Yu walked over hesitantly, feeling lonely and helpless. Don't leave me behind. Chapter 3367. I didn't, Yu frantically tried to explain, brother, I didn't bully you, then where's the amethyst bracelet I gave you? Yu quickly looked down at his wrist. The amethyst bracelet that he had been wearing was gone. Where's the bracelet? You lost it. Xiao Yichen carried Yueyao and said angrily, Yueyao, let's go. Ignore him. Yueyao looked at him coldly. She turned around and lay in Xiao Yichen's arms. Without looking at him again, she turned around and walked into the sea. Yu panicked and chased after her desperately. However, he saw Xiao Yichen carrying Yueyao further and further away. Half of his body was covered by the sea. Danger! Come back! Yu also rushed into the sea and shouted hysterically, don't leave me behind. Brother, Yueyao, don't leave me behind. Wait for me. A wave hit him and he was instantly swallowed by the seawater. The salty seawater kept rushing into his mouth. He struggled desperately between his lips and teeth, but his body kept sinking. He looked at the bottom of the sea. He struggled to open his eyes. As he breathed hard, Yunna's ferocious and terrifying face flashed across his eyes. It's you. Yu opened his mouth wide in shock. The seawater poured into his lungs. He grabbed his hands in despair, trying to grab hold of a life-saving straw. In the boundless sea, he could not grab hold of anything. He could only let the waves hit him. When he woke up again and opened his eyes, he was in a white room. The snow-white curtains, the snow-white walls, and the snow-white bed woke him up immediately. He sat up and looked around. There was no one in the room. He was completely flustered. He lifted the blanket and ran to the door. However, the door would not open no matter how hard he tried. He hit the door in despair and cried, Mommy! Mommy! Daddy! Daddy, where are you? Xiao Yichen, save me, the door suddenly opened. He rushed out and saw a group of strangers standing there. They looked at him coldly and whispered in low voices. An unwanted child. What a pity. He has no parents. Orphans, so pitiful, Yu said angrily, I have daddy. I have mommy. A voice sounded above his head. Everything you see is just a fantasy. You don't have a mother or a father. You liar. He turned around abruptly, but all he saw was darkness. When he turned around again, the group of people had already disappeared. He was in complete darkness, unable to see his own fingers. Beneath his feet, it was as if the ground had been hollowed out, a bottomless abyss. He cautiously took a step forward, yet he heard footsteps coming from ahead. Yu turned around with tears in his eyes, only to see Yun Shishir walking slowly with her back to him. She was dressed in white, and her black hair was tied up with a hairband. She looked gentle and beautiful. Mommy! Yu wiped his tears pitifully and chased after her. Mommy, don't leave Yu behind. Mommy, give mommy a hug. He chased after Yun Shishir and carefully grabbed the corner of her shirt. Mommy, give mommy a hug. She snapped back to her senses and slapped his hand away with a loud smack. Who are you? He was caught off guard and fell to the ground. He looked up blankly and saw Yunshushu looking at him coldly. She said coldly, I'm not your mommy. Mom, don't call me mommy. Yunshushu's face suddenly became fierce. She said coldly, you've got the wrong person. Chapter 33:68. Boo-hoo, Yu finally broke down. He threw himself at her and hugged her waist as tears streamed down his face. I'm Yu, mommy. How can you not recognize Yu? Mommy, I'm Yu. I told you that you've got the wrong person. Yunshushu pushed him away forcefully. Yu lost his balance and fell backward, falling into the abyss. Ah, Yu cried in despair. Don't leave me behind. Don't leave me behind. When he woke up, the sky was overcast with dark clouds. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Yu stood on the gloomy grassland. He walked slowly and looked at the endless grassland. His body went limp and he knelt on the ground weakly. The woman's voice sounded again. Who are you? Yu looked up tiredly. When he opened his eyes, the dark clouds were overcast, just like his gloomy inner world. Who am I? He opened his dry lips and muttered to himself, who am I? He couldn't remember, he only felt that he had an exhausting dream. When he woke up, he didn't know where he was or where he was. What's your name? The woman's voice was persuasive. What's your name? Yu opened his eyes wide in a daze. He muttered to himself in despair, what's my name? What did you see? Yu looked around and shook his head. I don't know. The grass on the grassland started to wither. In an instant, it started to rain heavily. In the rain, he struggled to open his eyes. He allowed the rainwater to pour into his eyes. It was bitter and painful. In the rain, an unfamiliar man walked over. He stood in front of him and bowed slightly. Yu looked at him in confusion but did not react. Do you know him? No. Yu shook his head. Who is he? He's from the Mu family. The Mu family, his name is Mu Yaja. Yu muttered the name silently, but an unknown and unfamiliar feeling welled up in her heart. Do you hate him? Yu rubbed his eyes and tears fell. He did not know why he was crying. Hearing the woman's voice, he muttered doubtfully, should I hate him? The man's figure gradually disappeared. In an instant, the world around him changed. Yu stood up. As far as his eyes could see, there was endless darkness. Below him was boiling hot lava, and in the middle of it were piles of white bones. The eerie fear invaded his heart. Do you remember your name? I don't know. Yu shook his head. I don't know anything, then what do you know? Yu started to tremble. She tightened her shoulders and shivered. I only know that I'm alone. He was alone. He was alone. You're not alone. Yu looked up in disbelief. You have a name. I have a name. He stood up and complained, liar. I don't have a name. I don't have a name. You have a name. The woman's voice said slowly, your name is, accompanied by a hoarse gasp. In the darkness, a pair of frightened eyes suddenly opened. A beam of moonlight reflected into the eyes, and the pupils suddenly contracted violently. The incandescent lamp above his head kept swaying, but the surroundings were pitch black. Under the dim light, the lonely shadow pulled at one's heart, and it was suffocating. Chapter 33:69. He was so tired. It was as if he was sitting in a deep nightmare. In his muddle-headed state, he dreamed of many strangers. The child stood up. His body swayed slightly as he looked around. In the medical center, people were walking back and forth. The cold light shone on his body, but he couldn't feel any warmth. He was wearing a snow-white hospital gown. The front of his gown was slightly open, and it was covered with thin sheets to detect his heartbeat and pulse. Alice walked over and smiled at him. "Fan, you're awake." He sat up slowly and held his forehead. He said tiredly, "I seem to have had a very long nightmare." Alice smiled. "Nightmare? What kind of nightmare was it?" His gaze was slightly dazed, and he smiled. "Someone called my name, but that's not my name." "Oh. You," he said these two words numbly, and his expression was blank. He heard someone calling his name, you. The funny thing was, he even dreamed of a woman. He kept chasing after the woman's back view, but the woman didn't turn back. He had already forgotten the face of the woman in his dream. He couldn't remember it clearly. Alice was stunned. She thought to herself that he had already gone through deep hypnosis, and many of his memories had already been sealed. However, the name you was still deeply etched in his mind. It seemed that it would take some time to completely seal his memories. Alice hugged him gently and said gently, "Gong Fan, it's just a nightmare. When you wake up, just forget about it." When Gong Xiaoying walked in, Yu was lying on the operating table in a deep coma. He had just gone through the 6th level of hypnosis. His young face was drenched in cold sweat, and his eyelids were trembling violently. Suddenly, a line of tears slowly flowed down and wet his sideburns. Gong Xiaoying walked over and looked at him. Even though he was in a deep coma, the weakness and helplessness on his face were very obvious. To him, this might be a nightmare. However, in fact, his memories were being sealed bit by bit in the depths of his mind. Usually, there weren't many opportunities to use this method. Most of the time, only when some mercenaries retired, Alice would choose to seal all their memories related to the Hurricane Group before letting them go. However, mercenaries from the Hurricane Group would choose to retire in a very small number of cases. Gong Xiaoying asked, "Have his memories been sealed?" "We still need to observe him carefully." Alice sighed. "This is an extremely painful process." Gong Xiaoying suddenly fell silent. After a long time, he suddenly asked, "How painful is it?" "This child is extremely attached to memories related to Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja. He was very resistant at first, so the first attempt at hypnosis failed." "Failed?" Gong Xiaoying said meaningfully, "This word rarely comes out of your mouth." Alice looked up and said helplessly, "He's very resistant to the new name Gong Fan. I rehearsed new memories for him, but he didn't accept it. He was very resistant. It was only until the 3rd level of hypnosis that he barely succeeded." As an experienced hypnotist, Alice could replace those old memories with new ones if she used advanced hypnosis skills. Chapter 3370. Gong Xiaoying gave him the name Gong Fan. Alice hypnotized him into a dream. In the dream, she guided him patiently and led him to accept new memories. She instilled in him that his name was Gong Fan, the eldest son of the 3rd generation of the Gong family. He grew up in the Gong family and was the core person in charge of the Deva project. He was also one of the candidates to inherit the Hurricane Group in the future. She also instilled hatred for the Mu family in him. Now, he was already at the 5th level of hypnosis. If there were no accidents, after the 10th level of hypnosis, he would completely forget those memories. Gong Xiaoying asked, "Will he still remember those memories in the future?" He was more concerned about this. Alice shook her head. Memories can never be erased. They can only be sealed. However, it will be very difficult to recall them if they are deeply sealed. Gong Xiaoying's heart calmed down slightly. He lowered his head and looked at Yu Yu's sweaty face. However, he heard Alice say worriedly, "This child has 2 personalities." "Dual personality?" "Yes." Alice said, "One is innocent, and the other is dark." Dual personality meant that a person had 2 relatively independent and separate personalities. It was a relatively serious psychological disorder. Generally speaking, a normal person would have two or more ways of thinking at the same time. Human nature itself carried an evil side. The evil side was usually accompanied by a strong desire and ambition. The two personalities had independent memories and usually did not interfere with each other. However, Yu had a dual personality. This surprised her a little. The innocent side was his true side and also his initial personality. The dark side came from the dark scenes of his childhood. It was influenced by his ears and eyes, so the second personality was split. However, this second personality had always been suppressed by the innocent side and was rarely stimulated. Yu wanted to protect Yunshushu. He did not hold back, rely on, and yearn for his mother. Therefore, the innocent and kind side had always been suppressed by the second personality. It would only be separated under special circumstances. Alice entered Yu's memories and discovered this personality. She also discovered all the dark memories in this personality. These memories did not interfere with the memories of the original personality. However, after Alice sealed the memories of Yunshushu and erased the memories of Muyaja, Xiao Yichen, and Yueyao, the original personality quickly disappeared. The second personality took over his body and completely took over his body. Alice said calmly, "His original personality has completely disappeared." She was a little annoyed. In the dream, Yu struggled fiercely. She kept setting up desperate and miserable dreams for him in order to seal those memories. However, what was left behind was a child who looked like a walking corpse. Gong Xiaoying remained silent. He turned around and asked slowly, "Is there a preliminary treatment plan for his heart problem?" "No." Alice said, "It will take a long time to set up a treatment plan. After all, I don't know enough about his condition. Do it as soon as possible." "Understood." Alice returned to the operating table and gently placed her right hand on his forehead. Fine cold sweat quickly soaked her palm. No. Chapter 3371. No. In his dream, he was running frantically on the surface of the sea. He kept looking behind him and saw a child who looked exactly like him walking towards him. The child looked at him coldly. His eyes were cold and gloomy on his handsome face. He was dressed in pitch-black clothes, as if he had become one with the night. He looked exactly like him. However, on his palm-sized face, his black hair was sharp and his eyes were deep. His thin lips were pursed tightly and his eyes were cold. "It's useless." The young man in black's voice was cold and indifferent. It was as cold as a piano on the sea. He walked slowly on the sea. He was calm and elegant. Even when the black waves hit him, he didn't move an inch. Even though Yu was running pathetically, he couldn't shake him off no matter how hard he tried. "You can't escape, no, don't come over." Yu ran forward like a madman. Beneath his feet was a dark sea. Through the shallow water, he seemed to see an endless abyss at the bottom of the sea. It was as if it was going to swallow him whole. Sharks swam around while wagging their tails. They opened their mouths from time to time, revealing their bloody mouths. Rubbing his eyes, Yu stepped on the seawater and ran toward the sea surface not far away. "Save me, save. Save me." He looked back from time to time, but the young man in black was getting closer and closer to him. He exclaimed and ran. However, in the blink of an eye, the young man's figure flashed and appeared in front of him. He was caught off guard and bumped into the young man. Yu was hit hard by the inertia and his body leaned backward. The young man in black held his hand tightly and pulled him in front of him. He held his shoulders. Yu finally saw his face clearly. He had a fair face and a pair of dark eyes that hid traces of scarlet. He had a high nose bridge and thin lips. When he smiled, he revealed his white teeth. "Where are you going?" Yu asked cautiously. Who Who are you? Who am I? The black-clothed youth tilted his head, his voice as cold as ice. I am you. You are lying. Yu shook her head. What are you trying to do? I've had enough of you. The black-clothed youth sneered arrogantly. Yu, from today onwards, let me replace you. And you are not worthy of existence. What? The black-clothed youth tightly gripped his shoulder and pulled him into his embrace. He used so much strength that it was as if he wanted to fuse into his own flesh and blood. Let's become one. Let me replace you. Yu struggled incessantly. However, the difference in strength was too great. He could only feel his body gradually turning into smoke and fusing with the black-clothed youth's body. No! Yu's eyes were filled with tears. Don't be afraid. The black-clothed youth smiled coldly and grabbed the back of his neck. As he lowered his head, his cold eyes slightly opened, revealing a sharp edge. From now on, I am you, and you will be reduced to ashes. No, Yu. Yunshusher was so shocked that she sat up on the bed. She had woken up from a nightmare and was covered in cold sweat. She looked around. In the dark bedroom, Xiao Yichen was sleeping beside her. He was frowning slightly but did not wake up. Only then did she realize that she had just had a nightmare. Chapter 3372. Yu. Yunshusher lifted the blanket and got out of bed. She hurriedly took out her car keys and left the house. She walked to the garage and sat in the driver's seat. She started the car with trembling hands and slowly drove out of the garage. When Xiao Yichen woke up, it was already midnight. He instinctively reached out, but the side of the bed was empty. Mommy. He instantly woke up. He sat up and called out, Mommy. There was no response in the empty room. Xiao Yichen immediately got out of bed and walked to the living room. He did not see Yunshusher. Mu Yazhou leaned against the sofa. He was exhausted from the night of searching. He walked over and gently pushed his shoulder. Daddy. Mu Yazhou was not in a deep sleep. When he woke up, he opened his eyes and saw that it was his father. What's wrong? Mommy is missing. What? Mu Yazhou took his jacket and walked into the garage. He realized that the Mercedes-Benz was gone. It had probably been driven away. Xiao Yichen asked anxiously, Where did Mommy go? I know where she went. Mu Yazhou bowed and said, Get in the car. Okay. The father and son got into the car and drove toward the harbor. For the past 3 days, Gong Jia had deployed more than 10 patrol boats to carry out a large-scale salvage operation. The area where Yu had gone missing was getting smaller and smaller. However, the area where Yu had gone missing was expanded to 10 nautical miles. Not a single corner was missed. A large-scale search was carried out, but there was still no news. It was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth. Dozens of underwater robots dove a few thousand meters into the sea to investigate, but they still could not find any clues. However, even though the cost of salvaging alone was a few million USD per day, no one said that they would give up. No news was the best news so far. However, as time passed, Gong Jia's faith was gradually eroded. The golden rescue time was within 72 hours. 72 hours were about to pass. This meant that Yu's chances of survival were very slim. However, if he was alive, he wanted to see him. If he was dead, he wanted to see his corpse. He would not give up. The car arrived at the port. Mu Yazhou got out of the car and walked to the port. The huge port was noisy. He suddenly thought of a place. He picked up Xiao Yichen and ran towards the beach. At dawn, the horizon shimmered faintly. Mu Yazhou walked to the seaside and saw Yunshusher standing by the seaside. She was staring at the sea, motionless. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he turned pale with fright. He struggled to jump out of Mu Yaja's arms and ran over to Yun Shishir, hugging her tightly from behind. "Mommy!" He looked up and saw that Yun Shishir had been staring at the sea since the beginning. Her eyes were red and swollen, and they were filled with despair and numbness. Xiao Yichen calmed down slightly. He walked in front of Yun Shishir and held her hand tightly. He comforted her and said, "Mommy, don't worry. You will be fine." She had not closed her eyes for 2 days and 2 nights. She was in a daze. Mu Yaja coaxed and lied to her. He sent her home to rest, but she dreamed that Yu was swallowed by the sea. She woke up with a start. Yun Shishir clenched her fists tightly. She suppressed her emotions and said in a trembling voice, "Is there still no news of Yu?" Chapter 33-73. Xiao Yichen quickly comforted her, "Mommy, don't let your imagination run wild. Didn't Uncle say that they haven't found him yet? This means that Yu is still alive." Yun Shishir took a deep breath and slowly squatted on the ground. She wrapped her arms around her knees and said in despair, "Xiao Yichen, Yu has fallen into the sea. Even if we send more people to search for him day and night, it will be like looking for a needle in a haystack. The sea is so big and the depth is a few thousand meters. 72 hours have passed. Do you think that Yu will be safe and sound? Will he really be okay?" Xiao Yichen was silent for a moment. Even he couldn't guarantee that Yu would be okay. But he had been waiting. Waiting for a miracle. Yun Shishir held her forehead in despair and said, "For the past 3 days, I've been lying to myself. Yu will be fine. Yu will be safe. But I can't lie to myself anymore." She finally broke down and knelt on the ground. Tears flowed out of her eyes and down her cheeks. She cried pitifully, "It's my fault. It's all my fault. No matter what he said back then, I shouldn't have let go of his hand." Little Yichen reached out and hugged her tightly as he burst into tears. "Mommy, don't scare me, okay?" He didn't know what to do. The news of Yu's disappearance was like the end of the world to him. But he held on and didn't dare to break down easily because he still had to take care of his mother and sister. If he couldn't recover, what would happen to his mother? Yun Shishir felt the same way. She had been deceiving herself and others, believing that Yu would be safe and sound. No one dared to give up easily. She knew that if she broke down, it would be twice as painful for Xiao Yichen and Mu Yaja. Gu Xing's departure had been a huge blow to her. During that period of time, Mu Yaja watched over her day and night, afraid that something would happen to her. Yu and Xiao Yichen stayed by her side. She didn't want to relive those days. However, she was barely holding on because she believed that Yu would be fine. However, 3 days had passed. Every minute and every second was torture, incomparable torture. She closed her eyes, but the nightmares continued. She began to be afraid of closing her eyes. She was afraid that if she woke up, she would be waiting for bad news, waiting for the end of the world. Xiao Yichen hugged her and suddenly said, "Mommy, I believe that Yu will be alive and well. We can't live without him, and he can't live without us." Back then, Yun Na and Li Qin were thrown into the sea by Li Dongqiang, but they didn't die in the end. Gong Jia said that he had sent as many people as he could to search for them. They didn't even let go of a few thousand meters under the sea. He swore that if anything were to happen to Yu, even if he were to die, he would definitely be able to find his corpse. However, there was no news for a few days. Gong Jia suspected that Yu was no longer in this area. There were a few islands near that area. He had already sent patrol boats to investigate. If there was any news, they would definitely be able to find Yu's whereabouts. Mu Yaja looked at the backs of the mother and son, who were leaning against each other. He suddenly loosened his clenched fists and slowly walked behind Yunshushu. His heart ached as he hugged her shoulders. It's okay. Chapter 3374. He said firmly, the little guy is so lucky. He'll be fine. Yunshushu gripped the back of his hand tightly. She used so much force that she almost broke his skin. He knew that she was enduring it. The fact that there was no news of Yu was like the sky falling down on her. Muyaja hugged her tenderly and kissed her forehead gently. He said gently, Shushu, let's go back and wait for Yu to come home. Wait for Yu to come home. These words had undoubtedly touched her deeply. Big drops of tears rolled down her cheeks. Little Chen wiped away his tears at once and gave a solemn smile. Yes. Mommy, let's go back and wait for Yu to come home. Muyaja coaxed her gently, so be good and stay at home and wait for Yu to come home, okay? Yunshushu's lips trembled violently. She looked up and widened her eyes. Choking, she said, no matter how long it takes, I'm willing to wait. But, will he come back to us? Why not? Muyaja hugged her tightly. His voice was slightly hoarse as he said, that guy is so clingy to you and likes to pester you. It's as if it's killing him to be away from you for a day. He always likes to chase after you. Mommy this and mommy that, how can he not want you? How can he not come home? Little Chen added, that's right. You can't leave mommy even if he leaves the air. He'll definitely come back. Otherwise, where else can he go? Yunshushu couldn't stop her tears anymore. She nodded pathetically. Ever since Yu was born, he had been like her little tail that she couldn't shake off no matter how hard she tried. She recalled how the little guy was extremely unwilling to spend time with Muyaja. He hugged her and said coquettishly, Mommy, you belong to Yu alone. Yu doesn't want daddy. Yu only wants mommy. She still remembered when she brought him to Fairy Tale Valley to play. Even though she couldn't participate in many of the activities, she still smiled brightly. Back at the hospital, when she treated Xiao Yichen slightly better, he would make things difficult for her unwillingly. Until she said seriously, you know what? Mommy doesn't belong to you alone. At that moment, Yu's eyes reddened. How could he not know that she also had feelings and free will? However, only the heavens knew how much mental work he had done before he let go and accepted Muyaja and Xiao Yichen. He had always been stingy and unwilling to share his mother's love with anyone else. However, he accepted Xiao Yichen and Muyaja from the bottom of his heart. No matter what choice mommy makes, I will definitely be by mommy's side. Because Yu can't live without mommy, and mommy can't live without Yu either. Since the beginning of his life, they had depended on each other for survival. She was the brightest dawn in his life and the warmth that he couldn't bear to part with. Yu's love for Xiao Yichen and Muyaja was mostly because he loved them both. When they got home, Muyaja carried Yunshushu to the bed and lay down beside her. He hugged her gently and said calmly, rest well. Don't let your thoughts run wild. Yunshushu suddenly turned around and threw herself into his arms. She hugged him tightly and greedily absorbed the warmth from his body. Don't leave me, the man's lips curled into a smile. Yes. I'll stay with you. I won't go anywhere. Chapter 3375. He hugged her for a long time before he slowly fell asleep. However, Xiao Yichen was no longer sleepy. He pushed open the bedroom door and was greeted with a cold and empty room. He turned on the lights and the room instantly lit up. He walked to the bed and sat on his side. This bed was his and Yu's bed. Ever since they moved here, they had been sleeping on the same bed. He was the one who suggested it. At first, Yu was very against it. However, he met such a clingy older brother and insisted on sleeping with him, saying that he was afraid of the dark. He still remembered how Yu drew a line on the bed and said arrogantly, "You're not allowed to cross the line. Do you understand? If you cross the line." "I understand." He lay down on the bed and pointed at the line. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, "I'm not allowed to cross the line, right? I understand." However, no matter how well he planned it, every time he slept in the middle of the night, he would find himself in all sorts of weird positions and squeezed to Yu's side. Sometimes, his calf would be on his stomach. Sometimes, his arm would be on his chest. Sometimes, he would feel cold in his sleep and he couldn't help but hug Yu. Yu couldn't sleep well because of him and would throw a tantrum at him the next day. However, he gradually got used to it. Xiao Yichen's sleeping posture was naturally terrible. No matter how much he warned himself before he slept that he had to lie upright and not move around, he knew that his sleeping posture must be terrible when he saw Yu's ashen face when he woke up. However, as time passed, their relationship got better. Yu was arrogant on the surface, but many mornings, when he woke up, he would find Yu hugging him gently and sleeping quietly. What was even more incredible was that as long as Yu hugged him, he would be like a gentle kitten and wouldn't move around. The feeling of being hugged by him was very warm. Therefore, even though he was very sleepy, he could not bear to break this warmth. But now, the bed was empty. The spot where Yu slept was cold and cheerless. He sat on the bed for a long time before he suddenly opened his palm. 2 amethysts lay quietly in his palm. It was the amulet that Yu had secretly stuffed into his hand before they left. "Xiao Yichen, you have to be well." In his hazy state, he heard Yu whisper into his ear. Unknowingly, her eyes became slightly moist again. Xiao Yichen wiped the corners of his eyes sadly and looked up at the ceiling. He wanted to force his tears back, but even so, they still flowed uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes. "Don't cry," he gently pressed his index finger against his lips and muttered, "Don't cry. Don't cry." Tears welled up in his eyes. He bit his lip hard and kept warning himself, "Mu Yichen, you can't cry. Mu Yichen." Yu's angry voice suddenly came from behind him. "Useless. You only know how to cry." Xiao Yichen was shocked. He turned around, but there was no one behind him. He bit his index finger as tears flowed out of his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He lowered his head and looked at the 2 amethysts. Suddenly, he clenched them tightly and walked to the desk. He took a tool and carefully connected the 2 amethysts with a red string. Chapter 3376. He rubbed the pendant gently with his fingers and muttered to himself sadly. "Yu, when are you coming home? Don't tell me you don't want to go home. Am I always making you angry? I promise I won't do it again. I won't tease you on purpose or make you unhappy anymore." Xiao Yichen pursed his lips and said, "The important thing is, when are you coming home?" He returned to the bed and lay down quietly. Looking at the empty space beside him, he reached out his arms in a daze, imagining Yu lying beside him. He wanted to hug him, but his arms grabbed nothing. Xiao Yichen's nose stung again. He gritted his teeth, clutched the blanket tightly, and let out a helpless whimper. He had a long and heavy dream, and it was so oppressive that he almost couldn't breathe. In the dream, the entire sky was gray and overcast with dark clouds. It gave off a very heavy feeling, and there was a strong aura of destruction. He looked around blankly and saw that he was standing on a withered sea. The seawater beneath his feet was rotten as if it had been soaked in ink. He tried to take a step forward and was actually able to stand firmly on the surface of the sea without falling. He suddenly realized that he was in a dream. Usually, when he was in a dream, no matter how bizarre it was, he would not realize that he was in a dream. But now, his consciousness was exceptionally clear. Mu Yichen walked on the surface of the sea in a daze. The waves hit his body, but he didn't feel any pain. He didn't know when he would wake up from this dream. A youth in black stood in the distance with his back facing him. He looked lonely and cold. Mui Chen walked over in confusion and asked hesitantly, "Who are you?" The youth in black had his back facing him and didn't say a word, as if he didn't hear him. Mui Chen walked closer and raised his voice slightly. "Who are you?" The youth in black finally reacted, but he didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he walked forward. Mui Chen suddenly felt strange and quickened his pace to catch up with him. The black-clothed youth walked casually, as if he was taking a stroll in a garden. Mui Chen chased after him until he was out of breath. From time to time, waves would hit him, hindering his footsteps. "Wait!" The young man gave him an extremely familiar feeling. Mui Chen quickened his pace and finally caught up with her. He said, "Wait." The black-clothed youth seemed to have finally heard his words. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, but his back was still facing him. Mui Chen stopped in his tracks and panted for a moment. He stretched out his hand and gently clasped his shoulder. "Who are you?" Just as her hand touched his shoulder, she felt a gust of cold air pressing against her. He couldn't help but retract his hand, but he saw the black-clothed youth turn his head slightly, and a handsome and familiar face immediately entered his eyes. "You." Mui Chen became nervous. "You, why are you here?" The black-clothed youth turned slightly and looked back at him. His empty and dark eyes seemed to be puzzled. "You." This name seemed extremely unfamiliar. The black-clothed youth repeated it silently and sneered. "Who's you?" Mui Chen's heart clenched tightly. You, don't you recognize me?" "I'm your brother." The black-clothed youth sized him up coldly and his lips curved into a thin smile. "Brother." Chapter 3377. Big Brother. His voice was as cold as ice, devoid of any warmth. Xiao Yichen suddenly felt that the young man in front of him was extremely unfamiliar. Even though his facial features and eyes were exactly the same as Yu's, his cold, affectionate gaze and empty eyes without any warmth or focus made him feel like a stranger. He seemed to be very different from the gentle and cute Yu in his memory. Even though Yu would occasionally show a cold expression, it was definitely not this kind of coldness. It was as if the coldness came from his bones. It made him shudder. Mui Chen looked at him with concern and said in a trembling voice, "Have you forgotten who I am?" "I'm your brother, Mui Chen." "Let go." The young man's voice was cold and had a hint of hostility that was hard to ignore. Mui Chen hugged his shoulders in heartache. Hot tears kept falling from the corners of his eyes onto the young man's thin shoulders. Yu, what's wrong with you? Are you really Yu? Why can't you recognize me? How can you not remember your brother? The youth remained indifferent to his helplessness and tears. His eyes stared blankly in the direction of the sea, not paying too much attention to him. Xiao Yichen looked up and held his face. He asked anxiously, "Where are you? Why didn't you come back?" "Mommy, Daddy, little sister, and I are waiting for you to come home." "When are you coming home?" The young man's cold eyes closed indifferently, and then opened again indifferently. His pitch-black pupils were like an abyss, without any focus. He could not even see his own reflection in his eyes. Yu, Xiao Yichen hugged him tightly and refused to let go. Yu, can you not scare me? Take a good look at me. Can't you recognize me? Hearing this, the young man pushed him away coldly and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "You've got the wrong person." After saying that, he turned around and walked away slowly. Xiao Yichen saw this and quickly chased after him. He reached out to grab his arm, but the young man waved him away expressionlessly. "Don't follow me anymore." Xiao Yichen's body fell to the surface of the sea. The seawater splashed up and surrounded him, but he struggled to get up and chased after him. Yu. He used all his strength to catch up to him. In a flash, he was in front of him and picked up the pendant around his neck. The two amethysts were reflected in the young man's of light. The young man was attracted by the pendant, and his eyes became somewhat focused. You really don't remember. Little Chen displayed the pendant and lamented bitterly, this is the amulet you gave me. I have the exact same purple crystal bracelet that I gave you as a gift. You said you liked it very much and would never leave it. You wore it all the time. You didn't even want to take it off when you were bathing. To protect me, you accidentally broke this bracelet. You blamed yourself and felt sorry for it. You risked your life to find these amethysts. Before we left, you gave it to me as an amulet. Do you really not remember? Have you really forgotten? The young man was silent for a long time. He looked at the pendant and felt that it was unfamiliar. He looked up at him again and said coldly, get lost. He pushed Xiao Yichen away. Behind the young man, a stormy sea that was dozens of meters high suddenly rose and covered him.